Chapter 31. That Quirinus Quirrell of Ravenclaw would do such a thing? It's exactly the same unlucky degree as the professor of Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts class. That's when Dumbledore immediately thought of Ian. But Dumbledore also didn't want to disturb Ian's trip, which might be a change of mind for Ian. Just leave it to Ian to ask him when he comes back. Now that Ian is back, Dumbledore can't wait to find Ian. Ian nodded, looked at the very happy Dumbledore, and said, "Yes, I threw the curse back on him. Has anyone been unlucky lately?" Dumbledore took out a copy of the Daily Prophet from the drawer and handed it to Ian. "Look for yourself, you've dealt with him badly." Ian laughed when he saw Quirrell in the Daily Prophet. Dumbledore laughed too, and continued, "It seems that my suspicion is not wrong. Quirinus Quirrell has a big problem." Ian nodded and asked, "Then what are you going to do?" Dumbledore stroked his beard and replied, "Send him back to Hogwarts. It's better than we go all over the world to find it. Take it as an experience for the little wizard." Ian frowned and said, "Aren't you afraid that Voldemort might hurt the little wizard at Hogwarts?" Dumbledore looked at Ian and smiled. "With you and Grindelwald helping me watch, I really can't think of anyone who can hurt the little wizards in front of the three of us." Ian spread his hands. "It turns out that Grindelwald and I are your coolies." "Ha ha ha, Ian, don't say that either," Dumbledore said. "They will be your friends and partners in the future." This time Ian didn't contradict Dumbledore again, just frowned. Seeing Ian like this, Dumbledore immediately had an answer in his heart. In the past, Ian would refute them, but this trip seems to have changed Ian's mind a lot. Without continuing the topic, Ian asked Dumbledore, "What about Grindelwald's identity? His problems are much more difficult than that mouse Voldemort." Dumbledore replied, "Grindelwald has found his identity. The image of old age is still preserved at Hogwarts. He will be Jack Rozier in Hogwarts, my assistant headmaster. Jack is the last patriarch of the Rozier family in France." Ian nodded, "So there is no problem." It's just that Ian thought, it seems that Hogwarts is rich and Demon Kings is not bragging. When Voldemort returns, all the Demon Kings of this era will gather together. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is equal to the Devil's Castle. Who dares to say that Hogwarts isn't the best wizarding school? By the way, Ian, one more thing." "What's the matter?" Dumbledore ate a BB's multi-flavored bean and said, "Every little wizard goes to school on the Hogwarts Express. I think you should experience it at least once too." "Bah, Merlin's beard. This time it smells like horse dung." On the morning of September 1st, King's Cross Station in London, England was as lively as usual. In a bustling station. At this time, a child wearing a black gold-rimmed windbreaker, carrying a black suitcase, and a top hat was looking for a platform. Ian tied his long silver hair behind his back, and his bright red eyes looked at the sign on the platform. Between Platform 9 and Platform 10. Ian looked down the platform one by one. Found it. Ian looked at the wall between platforms 9 and 10. "I thought to myself that this design by Otalin Gampour is really a genius, and it must be painful to bump into someone behind. Especially the little wizard pushing the luggage cart." Just as Ian was feeling malicious, a voice came from behind. "It's full of muggles. Fred. George. Come on. Today is your brother Ronald's first school day. Don't be late." This familiar line. There was a child in front of the Weasley family, and Molly Weasley thought it was a muggle child before she was carrying big bags like little wizards. Molly stepped forward and asked, "Son, did you get separated from the adults?" Ian looked back and saw the Weasley family with fiery red hair. The moment Ian turned his head, Molly recognized him as the wizard riding the dragon in Diagon Alley that day. "Merlin's beard. You're Ian Grindelwald." Dumbledore had already explained Ian's origin to Arthur Weasley when Ian bought the book that day. It's just that Dumbledore didn't tell Arthur that Ian was the new professor. Hearing Molly's words, the Ministry of Magic personnel on duty on the platform suddenly became nervous. And everyone in the Weasley family behind Molly also heard Molly's exclamation. "Look, George. That's what we believe in. Fred, I'm not blind. He's so cool." Contrary to the excited twins, Ronald and Ginny turned pale in an instant. Ian left too much psychological shadow on them. Charlie and Patsy were so nervous that their palms were sweating. They understood what the surname Grindelwald represented. And a dark-haired figure behind the Weasley family was so panicked that he was sweating profusely. Ian smiled, he still has a good impression of this interesting family, and said, "Hello." Molly dare not treat Ian like a child. She looked at Ian and said nervously, "Hi, Mr. Grindelwald. I'm Molly Weasley. They are my children. Are you going to Hogwarts?" Ian nodded to Molly. "Yes, Mrs. Weasley." Ian then looked at the people behind Molly, especially the figure of Harry Potter, and said, "I'll go in first, maybe your children are a little nervous." Molly hurriedly said to Ian, "Okay, Mr. Grindelwald, I'm very sorry to delay you." Ian shook his head, turned and walked onto platform 9 3/4. Harry's clothes were wet with cold sweat now. Met this scary professor just after parting ways with Hagrid. His gaze was terrible. Molly was relieved to see Ian walk into platform 9 3/4. Turning back to the twins, he shouted, "You don't go to appease your younger brothers and sisters. You are still yelling. At school especially you two must watch out for Ian Grindelwald. You should know what he represents. Don't make fun of him." George said with a smile. "Oh, my Lord Mother. He is our faith." Fred continued. "Yes. He is our role model." "Shut up." Chapter 32. Ian walked through the wall and saw an old steam train. A red and black case with Hogwarts Express written on it. Ian sighed a little, this was the first time he saw such a huge magical creation in this world. It is said that this train has the largest amount of magical engineering in wizarding history. It involved 167 memory spells and the largest record of casting hidden spells in British history. Just as Ian was admiring this huge magical miracle, a voice came from beside Ian. "Hello, do you need help?" Cedric Diggory saw a little wizard in a trench coat stop and watch the train, and there was no one else around him. So Cedric Diggory decided to go up to him and ask him if he needed help. Cedric is a very warm-hearted guy, and he's a Hufflepuff for sure. Cedric had a handsome appearance, and he was very popular at Hogwarts. Many little wizards and their parents followed Cedric's voice and looked over. Ian turned around when he heard the voice of someone asking. When Cedric saw Ian, his first reaction was, this little wizard must be a pure blood. Ian's grooming is meticulous, with long silver hair, bright red eyes, and an unusually handsome appearance. In addition, he didn't see any luggage he was carrying. Cedric, who is a master of Hufflepuff, guessed that Ian's suitcase might have a traceless stretching spell. In fact, Ian's luggage is at Hogwarts, and his suitcase only contains Gallon, wizard robes and some books. The people around also saw Ian, and they all commented. That little wizard is so handsome. Does he have Miwa blood? I know Miwa has white hair. It must be this year's junior. I want to take him down. What are you thinking? He just entered school. Why does it always feel like I've seen that little wizard before? There must have been wizards in the crowd that day in Diagon Alley, but Ian was dressed completely differently. In addition, they can only watch from a distance, and no one will connect Ian with the powerful dark wizard for a while. Ian saw that it was another acquaintance and said, "Thanks, I just wanted to see the magic train." Cedric froze for a moment, not expecting Ian to say that. So he smiled awkwardly and said, "Okay then, I'm really sorry." Cedric stretched out his hand and introduced himself. "My name is Cedric. I'm a third-year student at Hufflepuff." Ian reached out and shook Cedric's hand, saying, "Ian Grindelwald." Cedric immediately wanted to exclaim, "Green." But before he finished speaking, as a wise man, he quickly covered his mouth with his hand. He knew that exclaiming now would definitely cause trouble for Ian. Ian watched Cedric's behavior, and his goodwill improved him a lot. Ian looked at Cedric, smiled and said, "Let's go, let's talk on the train." After speaking, Ian was ready to board the train. Cedric nodded quickly and followed Ian onto the train. The little wizards around looked at Cedric's behavior and were quite surprised. But now that everyone has left, they also need to get on the bus quickly. After Ian and Cedric boarded the train, they found an empty private room and sat down. Cedric then said embarrassingly, "Sorry, Grindelwald. I didn't mean to." Hearing Cedric's apology, Ian smiled and said. It's okay, didn't you say it? Cedric was still very embarrassed, Ian could not see him relax. So Ian changed the subject and said. Let's put our luggage away first. Cedric got up immediately and said. Let me release it for you. Ian shook his head with a smile and said. No thanks. So Ian snapped his fingers, and Cedric saw his luggage float by itself. Automatically float to the shelf above, and put them in order by yourself. Seeing this scene, Cedric was so shocked that his jaw almost dropped. Cast spells without wands and spells. This is not something a little wizard can do. Even the 7th grade students, most of them can't even cast spells without spells. You. Looking at the shocked Cedric, Ian waved his hand and said. Just some tricks. For Dumbledore and Grindelwald, this is indeed a trick. After hearing this, Cedric said excitedly. This is no trick. I really can't believe it. Grindelwald. You are really a genius. I have never seen any little wizard who can do this. You. Just when Cedric was about to ask something, the door of the carriage was suddenly pushed open. George Weasley and Fred Weasley burst in, and exclaimed. Hey! Cedric! Jordan told us you were here. You can't believe who we met today. I'm telling you, oh! Merlin's big pants! Cedric's face darkened because of being interrupted, and he said. Can you still knock on the door? Ignoring Cedric's complaints, George said excitedly. Hey, friend! Now's not the time to talk about that. Fred, equally excited, continued. Yes. We want to tell you a big secret. Sitting before you is our role model. The most terrifying surname bearer of the 20th century. It is also our faith. The two said in unison. Mr. Ian Grindelwald. Cedric rubbed his sore temples and said. Keep your voice down. It's not good for others to hear you. Ian also looked at the two with a smile. This pair of live treasures was really interesting, so he said. Come in and sit down, we have a lot of time. Oh! Thanks to the great Lord Dark Lord for the invitation. The two immediately sat in the box excitedly. Fred went on to ask. Grindelwald, can we call you Ian? Ian thought about it and nodded. Seeing Ian nodded, the two quickly asked again. Ian. Is that dragon in Diagon Alley yours? Before Ian could answer, Cedric exclaimed. That dragon in Diagon Alley that day belonged to Ian. The Ian in front of Cedric gradually overlapped with the white-haired figure in Diagon Alley. Ian scratched his head and said. Yes, that dragon is my servant. That's pretty cool. Awesome. We're going to do this one day. Cedric was stunned. The Weasley twins went on to say. We just met someone else. You will never think of it. We have met the famous savior. Harry Potter. Mom also asked us to take care of him more. Chapter 33. George and Fred are restless people. After the two finished talking about what they were interested in, they couldn't sit still anymore. They remembered that there was a marsupial spider in Lee Jordan's place and ran over. After Cedric remembered Ian's spellcasting level, he took out the book Black Magic, a guide to self-defense, and began to ask Ian questions. Maybe Ian knew. After all, it is true that Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts professor is unreliable. It should be said that Cedric is worthy of being a top student, and many of the questions are beyond the knowledge required by the 3rd grade. As for Cedric, the more he asked, the more shocked he became. Did you tell him he was a young wizard who hadn't entered school yet? Even if someone tells him Cedric, Ian is a professor. He believes it. How dare he swear on Merlin's wand? Cedric looked at Ian weakly and said. I really can't believe you are a little wizard who hasn't entered school yet. Or can all the wizards of the Grindelwald family have your level? Ian looked at Cedric, who doubted his life, and said with a smile. I'm special, don't worry about it. Cedric nodded weakly and said. I wish you could come to Hufflepuff, so we have hope for the House Cup. You can definitely break the Slytherin streak. There aren't very good people in Slytherin. Ian just smiled and replied. Every house in Hogwarts is very good. Slytherins have their sparks too. We must trust the judgment of the Sorting Hat. Hearing Ian's words, Cedric sighed. Ian, talking to you really feels like I'm talking to professors. Honestly. The door of the carriage was opened again. Cedric's face became even darker. This was the second time. Cedric didn't have a seizure when he saw that it should be a low-grade little wizard. Only a proud female voice was heard. Anyone see a toad? A boy named Neville lost one. It's you. Hermione stared at Ian in his seat with wide eyes. Finally found you. Hermione walked into the car, sat directly next to Ian, stared at Ian and said. How could you leave without saying hello? Do you know how many more questions I want to ask? Ian looked at the angry Hermione seriously, and said. Miss Granger, shouldn't you knock on the door before entering? Hearing Ian's words, Hermione realized how rude she was. It was also because he was too anxious to help Neville find Toad, so he blushed instantly. Hermione said coyly. I'm sorry, I was in a hurry. Ian then said seriously. I think you should apologize not only to me, but also to Cedric. You interrupted someone else. Hermione had tears in her eyes at this moment, and she held back and said to Cedric. Sorry. As soon as the words were spoken, her tears fell. Ian sighed as he watched the scene. Even though Hermione was a strong and powerful witch in the story, she was still 11 years old after all. It is not incomprehensible to come to an unfamiliar environment and be eager to prove yourself. Maybe it's because of feelings, or knowing the feeling of loneliness and fear. Ian reached out and stroked her shaggy hair and said. Okay, I also apologize to you, I shouldn't have left without saying hello last time. Hearing Ian's apology, she felt even more wronged. If you cry anymore, your front teeth will become longer. But hearing the latter sentence, Hermione stopped crying instantly. Covering his mouth with one hand, and slapping Ian's hand away with the other, he said with a choked voice. Your front teeth will grow. Looking at the appearance of the girl in front of him at this moment, Ian couldn't help laughing. Seeing that Ian was still laughing, Hermione became more and more angry. Grabbed one of Ian's hands and bit it. Hiss, let go. Ian frowned in pain. Seeing Ian's painful expression, Hermione let go, feeling much better immediately. But suddenly found that there was a melon-eating Cedric next to him. And Neville Longbottom, who was stunned at the door. His face turned red in an instant, and he looked at Ian fiercely. Ian shook his hand, inhaled and said. It really hurts? I saw a small tooth mark on Ian's hand, and the position of the two front teeth was even more prominent. Hermione glared at Ian again, gritted her teeth and said. You deserve it. But did you see Neville's toad? Cedric, who had been watching the excitement, said with a smile on his face. Let Ian find it for you, he's pretty good. Hermione looked at Ian suspiciously. Is he great? Of course. He's Grindelwald. Hermione nodded, lifted her chin and said. I know Grindelwald. It has been recorded in a history of magic and modern history of magic. The surname Grindelwald. Seeing this, Ian quickly interrupted Hermione's tirade. Stop. I see. Let's find Toad first. Hermione's speech was interrupted. But when she heard about finding the Toad, she decided to endure it first, and said to Ian. How are you going to find it? Ian looked at Neville Longbottom and said. Neville, come in and sit down first. Neville Longbottom jumped when he heard his name being called. His grandma said never to have anything to do with Grindelwald. But when he thought of his own Toad, he went to the carriage with a pale face and sat down. Ian looked at Neville. This is the future Gryffindor juggernaut. It still looks like a small doormat. Neville was growing paler. Just when he felt like he was about to suffocate, he heard Ian go on to say. Tell me about your Toad's appearance. Is there any special feature? Neville nodded apprehensively and said. Lie foo-it. Ian nodded after listening, and waved his hand. Left is flying. Hermione frowned, and was about to speak when she heard the sound of something flying by in the corridor. Then, a toad flew into Neville's hand. Neville was taken aback again. But after seeing clearly that it was Leif in his hand. Life. Thanks. Neville was so happy that he thanked Ian repeatedly. Ian waved his hand, saying no. Cedric sighed. Sure enough, every time he saw Ian cast a spell without a wand, he would be amazed. Hermione's eyes widened in shock. Clutching Ian's arm excitedly, he said. The flying curse just now was cast without a staff. I've read about it. It takes a lot of skill. The flying curse is also a spell that only senior students can learn. Ian, how are you? Looking at the excited little witch, Ian patted her on the head and said, you will do it in the future, you can learn it at Hogwarts. Now let's enjoy the ride first, shall we? Chapter 34. Hermione sat next to Ian, puffed up. She thinks Ian just didn't tell her on purpose. Ian also looked at her helplessly, he didn't want to give lectures on the train either. Cedric then asked Ian. Ian, how did you and Granger meet? Ian thought for a while and said. I met it when I was traveling in Brighton. Hermione interjected. That's right. It's this impolite guy who left without saying a word. Do you still have the nerve to talk about me? Snort. Cedric laughed. Ian, it seems that you also have something that you are not good at. Ian looked at Cedric helplessly, and said. I'm not omnipotent. At this time, there was a knock on the door of the box. Cedric opened the door, and an old witch pushed a cart at the door, and asked with a smile. Would you like some snacks, kids? After thinking about it, Cedric decided to choose some, which were still some distance away from Hogwarts. Cedric turned around and asked. Do you want something to eat? Neville and Hermione looked at the cart curiously, but still embarrassed. Neville said in a low voice. I don't need to. His grandma gave him very little pocket money, and he needed to save some money. It was the same with Hermione, her money was used to buy books, and the rest of the money was only enough for urgent needs at Hogwarts. She also said embarrassingly. Thank you, I don't need it either. But the curious eyes betrayed her. Ian saw the embarrassment of the two, and said to the witch. I want it all. In the surprised eyes of the three. Ian waved his hand, and the suitcase opened automatically, and several galleons flew out into the witch's hands. Oh! Thank you, boy. Have to say, your spellcasting is beautiful. Today is her lucky day, a little wizard just bought out her stroller. Now this is the second car. The witch drew her wand and cast a spell, and the snacks on the cart flew onto the table in Ian's box. After the witch left, both Hermione and Neville looked embarrassed. Cedric looked at Ian and said. Ian, this is not very good, let me treat you to eat. After speaking, he was ready to pay Ian. In fact, he doesn't have much pocket money, but when he first met, he felt that as a senior, he still needs to hire little wizards. What's more, Ian just explained so much knowledge to him. Ian gave up with a smile and said. There is still so much time at Hogwarts, there will be opportunities in the future. For the rest of the time, the four of them chatted over snacks, mostly Hermione was telling Ian interesting things about the Muggle world. The atmosphere in the carriage also slowly relaxed. The relationship between the four of them suddenly became much closer. It's almost time, you guys change your clothes, Hermione said. I'm going to get my luggage and wizard hat too. Hermione eagerly changed into her wizard robe at home before boarding the train. It was almost Hogwarts at this time, and Hermione reminded the three of them to change their school uniforms quickly. And then Ian grabbed Hermione and said. It's not that troublesome. Newbie. In an instant, a luxuriously dressed house elf appeared in front of Ian and the others. Master, what can Newbie do to help you? Newbie saluted Ian first. Ian pointed to Hermione and Neville, and said. Go and help them get their luggage. Good master. After saying that, Newbie used apparition to disappear. All three of Hermione were stunned. Cedric asked in surprise. Is that a house elf? Ian nodded and said. The luggage will be delivered in a while. Without waiting for Cedric to continue asking, Hermione asked excitedly. Ian, what is a house elf? Ian looked at the excited Hermione and replied. Servants of wizards, they will do anything for wizards. Hermione felt that something was wrong in what Ian said, but couldn't tell what it was. At this time, Cedric continued to ask with a complicated expression. The house elf just now is wearing clothes, won't it be a problem? Ian shook his head, looked at Cedric and said. I asked for it. Then I saw that it was covered with gemstones. Cedric asked a little uncertainly. Ian nodded to Cedric. Only then did Hermione and Neville realize it. That house elf just now looks gorgeous in clothes. There are so many gems on it. It wasn't long before Hermione and Neville's luggage arrived. This time the three of them saw clearly what Newbie was wearing. They all looked at Ian. How rich is this guy? Ian snapped his fingers and used magic to change into his wizard robe. Hermione and the others were amazed when they saw Ian's wizard robes. Because Ian's wizard robes are not the same as the students' wizard robes. A closer look at Ian's black wizard robes reveals that it is made from the scales of some kind of creature. And the silver pattern is embroidered on the wizard robe, which seems to be a very classical pattern. A purple diamond-shaped crystal hangs from the brim of the wizard hat. The buttons of the inner lining are all made of red gemstones. At this time, Ian is like a nobleman among wizards. The silver-haired blood eyes are even more mysterious. Hermione was stunned and her heart beat faster. Neville also had a look of disbelief. At this time, Cedric said very entangled. Ian, you will be told by the professors like this. But I have to admit that you look great in this robe. Hermione said anxiously, Ian, we should obey the school rules, it's not right. Hearing what Cedric and Hermione said, Ian laughed. Don't worry about that, I'm special. Ian's words puzzled the three of them. In the end, only Hermione strongly asked Ian to abide by the school rules, but Ian still refused. Seeing that Ian still didn't listen, Hermione stepped aside and started to sulk. When the train was about to enter the station, a voice came from the horn on the train. Wizards, please leave your items on the train, someone will deliver them to your dormitories. The train arrived at the station in a short while, only to hear Hagrid's voice from outside the window. First year wizard. First year little wizard. Assemble here. Ian then said. Let's go, get out of the car. We're here. Cedric said to Ian. I am not with you, I am waiting for you at Hogwarts. Hermione and Neville, who were still sulking, were very surprised. But Cedric just wouldn't say why. On the train, even if he asked about the sorting ceremony, he didn't say anything. After Cedric left, the three of Ian got out of the car and walked towards Hagrid. Ian's dress immediately aroused discussions among many students. Look quickly. That first-year wizard. Which family's pure blood is he? I don't know, but it should be watched by the professors. Hope you don't come to Slytherin, he's too ostentatious. Only Harry and Ronald, who had bruised noses and swollen faces, turned pale after seeing Ian, and dared not speak. They got into a fight with the Malfoy trio in the car. According to the plot, Hermione will scare away the Malfoy trio at a critical moment. But this time Hermione was in Ian's box, and no one tried to persuade her to fight. 3-on-2, if the size is not dominant, it is natural to be unable to fight. Later, after Ronald knew through Harry that Ian was still their professor, Ronald saw Ian, and his legs were trembling. Although he didn't believe it, it was terrifying to think about it. In the car they have a united front. Ian is a dark wizard. Hermione tugged on Ian's robe and said worriedly. They're all talking about you. You should listen to me and obey the school rules, Ian. Ian patted Hermione's hand and said with a smile. It's okay, we'll find out when we get to school. Hermione's face flushed, but she didn't let go of Ian's robe. Chapter 35. Called by Hagrid, the little wizards were brought to the Black Lake. Many boats have been parked on the shore. Hagrid said as he helped the little wizards onto the boat one by one. 4 people per boat. Stay safe. Under Hagrid's command, the little wizards were very orderly, and soon it was Ian's turn. Hagrid looked at Ian, Hermione who was pulling his robe, and Neville behind him, and said with a smile. Ian, it looks like you've made a new friend. I have to say, you look very handsome today. Of course, you are usually handsome. Ian patted Hagrid's arm and laughed. Thanks Hagrid. I'm on board first, see you at Hogwarts. See you at Hogwarts. The three of Ian boarded the boat, and Hagrid arranged for a little wizard with golden hair and double braids. Hi, hello, my name is Hannah Abbott. Hagrid really knows how to arrange this. Hannah Abbott is the future wife of Neville. Ian greeted Hannah with a smile and said. Hi, my name is Ian Grindelwald. Hannah exclaimed when she heard Ian's name. Grindelwald. Then he covered his mouth and looked at Ian in fear from behind. Ian shook his head, it seems that the pure blood family has a deep grudge against him. Hermione was a little angry, and was about to question Hannah, but was stopped by Ian pulling her robe. So Hermione sat down indignantly. Only Neville comforted Hannah from the back, saying that Ian was not a bad person. At this time, Hagrid's voice came. "Is everyone on board?" Hagrid was in a boat by himself, and he was too big for his size. Then Hagrid went on to shout. "We're all on board. Let's go." The magic boat carrying the little wizard slowly started to float towards the opposite side of the Black Lake. Hermione looked at the surface of the Black Lake, feeling inexplicably nervous. In order to ease her emotions, she grabbed Ian's wizard robe with her small hands, looked up at Ian and asked. "Ian, do you know that tall professor just now? He didn't scold your school uniform, but praised you. Ian, is there something you're hiding from me?" Ian smiled and replied. "That's Hagrid, he's not a professor. You'll find out when you get to school, Hermione. And he's the keykeeper at Hogwarts, and a friend of mine." Hearing Ian's words, Hermione nodded. "But I still can't figure out why Ian is fined for violating the school rules." She is very worried. Ian deliberately didn't tell her. But suddenly, as if remembering something, Hermione looked seriously into Ian's eyes and asked. "Then, are we friends?" Ian looked at Hermione's expectant eyes and sensed the wave of her soul. Anxiety, tension, and fear predominate. The fear of being rejected and not being recognized is something Ian doesn't know well. Because it was the first time he felt this emotion from someone else's soul, but without any malice. Thinking of this, Ian seriously replied to Hermione. "I think we're already friends." Hermione didn't smile until she heard Ian's answer. Hermione's mood also relaxed a lot. "The Tsundere little witch is back." A less nervous Hermione began to tell Ian her long tirade. "Ian, the giant squid in the Black Lake is very friendly. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history. But there is no book about sorting." Looking at the brightly lit Hogwarts from the boat. What should have sounded in Ian's ear was the Hedwig theme. But now Ian can only helplessly listen to the real-time explanation by the little witch. Not long after, the boat docked. After the little wizards got off the boat, Hagrid led them up the steps of Hogwarts Castle. The little wizards are obviously very curious about this magic castle. Ian sensed excitement around him, but there was also a streak of irritation in it. Ian looked back and it was Draco Malfoy. Draco Malfoy feels like he's having a rough day today. "In the car, I wanted to take my younger brother to make friends with the famous Harry Potter again. What happened in Diagon Alley was just a misunderstanding. But who would have seen the damned redhead in that car, the Weasleys?" Seeing the members of the pure-blood traitor family, Draco naturally wanted to sneer like his father. Then help Harry Potter drive out these red-haired traitors. But who would have thought that damned Harry Potter was not only ungrateful. That damned mouse dared to bite the noble Malfoy. In this way, 5 people and 1 rat became a bunch. So now one of his eyes is still swollen, it was attacked by Ronald. But as long as the Poot and the red-haired Popper are worse, he can guarantee that the 2 of them will definitely have bruised noses and swollen faces at this time. After all, Draco's henchmen, Gregory Goyle and Vincent Crabbe, were brainless, but strong indeed. His dad had told him before school that he would be friends with Harry Potter and the heir of the Grindelwald family. But now Harry Potter is planning to go bankrupt. The famous Harry Potter actually got mixed up with the poor son of the Weasley family. In this case, his father would not blame him if he knew about it. Find Grindelwald now. After Draco made up his mind, he looked around at the little wizards around him. He saw a silver-haired wizard in fine clothes, and a witch behind him. Draco suddenly showed disdain. "Goyle. Crabbe. You must not learn from that man. Not attending the sorting ceremony as required by Hogwarts. It must be some upstart kid who suddenly came to Hogwarts. Just wait, he will definitely be kicked out at the sorting ceremony later." Ian could naturally hear Draco's words, and the corners of his mouth twitched. This Draco could really talk, no wonder Harry was always so angry with him. Ian has already made a note of Draco in his heart. Wait until the defense against the dark arts class and then slowly look for this foul-mouthed kid. After a while, the little wizards were led by Hagrid to the oak gate of the auditorium with anticipation. Hagrid knocked 3 times on the door. The door swung open, and McGonagall stepped through the door. "Just leave it to me here, thanks, Hagrid." McGonagall looked serious, but there was a lot of smile in McGonagall's eyes when he saw Ian and Hermione pulling his robe. Ian found McGonagall's eyes strange. But he couldn't say it. Before he could think about it, McGonagall said, "Welcome to Hogwarts." Chapter 36. The opening banquet is about to begin, but before you take your seats in the auditorium, you first need to confirm which college you each enter. McGonagall introduced Hogwarts houses and house rules to the young wizards. Among them, the Academy Cup is highlighted. It seems that McGonagall's obsession with the Academy Cup is very deep. And remind little wizards to pay attention to their own image and behavior. It feels like a great reminder of future Gryffindor wizards. The sorting ceremony is about to begin. While waiting, check your image and refresh yourself. After speaking, McGonagall's serious eyes swept over the little wizards, and most of the little wizards were frightened and hurriedly checked their attire. McGonagall was still shocked when he saw the bruised and swollen Harry and Ronald. This year's young wizard is really courageous. Fight on day 1. Thinking of this, McGonagall thought with a headache, this year's Gryffindor may have a few more troublemakers. McGonagall feels that the Academy Cup is getting farther and farther away from her. Then McGonagall took a deep look at Harry and Ronald, then turned and walked into the auditorium. The little wizards saw McGonagall leave, and most of the little wizards were very nervous. The professor just now is so scary. I heard that there will be a competition to catch goblins in the branch. No, I heard that it seems like I'm going to fight the troll one-on-one. No, my brother told me to fight the fire dragon. Ian shook his head at the increasingly outrageous rumors. I looked at the few people who were talking nonsense, one of them was Ronald, and the other was Malfoy. Well, it's all a lie. Instead, Hermione next to him was getting more and more nervous. Looking at Ian unconsciously again. The little face turned pale, and the voice tremblingly asked, "Ian, are we really going to fight the dragon for the sorting ceremony?" Ian looked at the flustered Hermione and found it very interesting. This clever little witch was so nervous that she would be fooled by these low-level lies. Ian patted her on the head with a smile and said, "How is it possible? The fire dragon is something that ordinary adult wizards dare not provoke. Wait, maybe it's just a small exam." Hermione glared at Ian. But Hermione relaxed a little after hearing what Ian said, and just started reciting books and spells in her mouth. She wants to review the book she has memorized. Just when the little wizards were having a heated discussion, shouts of terror resounded among the little wizards. Especially Harry, who jumped up in fright. Hermione next to Ian was also scared and grabbed Ian's arm. I saw more than 20 pearl-white translucent ghosts slowly entering the room where the new students were. Pavis is too much. I don't know who gave him the alchemy gloves. He can actually cast spells on ghosts. I just went back to Hogwarts today. He turned me into a ghost pig. It seems that the fact that he gave us nicknames is no longer a big deal. We need to hurry up and find the ghost who stayed at Hogwarts and ask what happened. Ian heard the conversation of the ghosts and nodded. It seems that he likes the gloves upgraded for Peeves later. At this time a ghost found the little wizards and said, "Ah, it's this year's freshman." The fat monk looked at the little wizards with a smile and said, "Hope you guys can come to Hufflepuff." At this point McGonagall returns, and the ghosts disperse. Seeing Hermione holding Ian's arm, the smile in McGonagall's eyes got even bigger. But now the sorting ceremony is about to start, you can ask Ian slowly while you are eating. McGonagall cleared his throat. Ahem. Hermione let go of Ian's arm when she heard McGonagall's voice, but her little face turned red. Still, a hand reached out and grabbed Ian's wizard robes. McGonagall continued gravely. "Now, line up, and come with me." After speaking, the little wizards quickly lined up, with Ian and Hermione at the end. McGonagall looked at the little wizards and nodded in satisfaction, then led the freshmen to the auditorium. At this time, the students of the 4 houses were already seated. Grindelwald was sitting to the left of Dumbledore on the teacher's bench, and there was an empty seat on the right. Quirrell sat in the far corner, wearing a purple turban on his head, looking exhausted. Snape sat next to him, watching the new students with an icy face. Flitwick and Sprout were smiling. The students were the first to spot Ian in a different outfit than his freshman. "Is he the freshman you mentioned?" Sure enough, he didn't wear a school uniform. Look at the little tail behind him. Do you think he will be kicked out by the professors? At this time, Dumbledore and Grindelwald on the professor's chair looked at Ian, who came in with the freshmen, and they had wonderful smiles on their faces. They saw Hermione, who was holding his wizard robe behind Ian. Flitwick and Sprout nod to Ian. They are also curious. Ian had already ignored the expressions of the professors at this point. He really wants to punch Grindelwald right now. Just now Grindelwald heard rumors of magic in his ears, and said in a joking tone, "Didn't you say you were not interested? Why became your followers so soon?" Just then Hermione whispered to Ian, "It's enchanted to look like the sky outside, I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." Ian nodded, his attention was on the sorting hat in McGonagall's hand. Dumbledore just wouldn't let him study the hat. Hide the hat while he's around. Didn't it almost break the hat? There are no surprises in the research. At this point McGonagall placed the sorting hat on a four-legged stool. The sorting hat split a mouth and sang, "You may think I'm not pretty. But don't judge a book by its cover. If you can find a more beautiful hat than mine, I can eat myself up. Come put on me. Don't be afraid." Up until here it's been the same as Ian remembers. But later changed. Just listen to the sorting hat continue to sing. "But watch out for your professors. They have the title of Demon King. The devil of death is among us. Don't fall into his hands." Ian's face turned black, this hat is definitely taking revenge on him. But at the same time Quirrell turned pale. Just when Quirrell was about to run away immediately, a voice sounded in his head. "Fool! Don't believe that hat. It's Dumbledore who's probing." Suddenly cold sweat drenched Quirrell's whole body, and he didn't dare to move for fear that Dumbledore would see something. And the deans know that the sorting hat is singing Ian. They also know about Ian and the sorting hat, and now seeing Ian with a black face, they feel very happy. Chapter 37. After the sorting hat sang, he bowed to everyone, and there was warm applause in the auditorium. Singing behind the sorting hat this year is really cool. Did a professor offend the sorting hat? I think it might be Snape. I'll bet a bag of chocolate frogs. At this time Hermione had already reacted and asked Ian, "Does the branch only need us to wear it?" Ian nodded, calmed down and said, "That's right. Simple test, right? Then can't you tell me directly?" "Humph. I thought there was an exam." Looking at the angry little witch, Ian suddenly felt better. Don't let that hat fall into his hands. Many little wizards also breathed a sigh of relief. No more fighting dragons or trolls. That's when McGonagall came to the sorting hat with a roll of parchment. "Whoever I call, come up and sit down, first. Hannah Abbott." Hannah staggered towards McGonagall, who put the hat on her head. After a while, the sorting hat shouted, "Hufflepuff. Terry Boot. Ravenclaw. Draco Malfoy. Slytherin. Hermione Granger." McGonagall said the name on the parchment. Then looking up at Hermione, McGonagall had a rare smile on his face. This surprised the students especially. Professor McGonagall smiled at the freshman. "I can't believe it either. Isn't this freshman a follower of that unruly freshman?" At this time, Hermione was already extremely nervous. But she saw Professor McGonagall smiling and looking at her with encouragement in his eyes. Although the visiting professor at her home is McGonagall, she is smart and doesn't think that Professor McGonagall will give her the only special attention at this time. This made her feel unbelievable, but she had a vague feeling that it had something to do with Ian. Hermione let go of Ian's wizard robes and whispered nervously, "Ian, I'm going up first." Ian smiled and nodded, encouraging. "Go ahead and trust yourself, Hermione, you're talented." Hermione hurried to the sorting hat and slapped it on her head. Professor McGonagall looked at the little witch and thought she might be a Gryffindor. Trust the instinct of the old dean. After Hermione put on the sorting hat, the hat said, "Oh! Another talented little wizard. Ravenclaw and Gryffindor both suit you. Difficult, difficult. This is, wait." Hermione heard the sorting hat making a frightened noise. "You and that monster are friends. My Godric." Hermione was stunned, her only friend was Ian, and the sorting hat said he was a monster. Hermione was a little annoyed and was about to speak. The sorting hat didn't give Hermione a chance to speak, and continued. Son, you must pay attention to him. He is dangerous. That's all I can tell you. Next. Gryffindor. Son, may Gryffindor give you enough courage. No one knows what Hermione and the Sorting Hat talked about. But when the Sorting Hat said Gryffindor, McGonagall's smile was even brighter. Sprout and Flitwick sighed regretfully. Snape snorted coldly and continued to look for those emerald green eyes in the crowd. McGonagall took off Hermione's Sorting Hat, and said with a smile to Hermione, who hadn't recovered yet. Miss Granger, take your seat at Gryffindor. I welcome you on behalf of Gryffindor. Hearing McGonagall's words, Hermione came back to her senses. Hermione quickly got up and looked at McGonagall and said, Thank you, Professor. Go ahead, kid. McGonagall nodded with a smile. Hermione ran to the cheering Gryffindor table, but all she could think about was the Sorting Hat. Over time, the new students were sorted into their respective colleges. Professor McGonagall then read to the parchment. Harry Potter. Not surprisingly, Harry Potter was still sorted into Gryffindor by the Sorting Hat. The auditorium ushered in the loudest cheers so far. The twins also shouted excitedly. We've got Potter! We've got Potter! But the difference was that apart from Snape, the headmaster and headmasters didn't pay much attention to Harry Potter's branch. Because what comes next is the main event. McGonagall and the Sorting Hat sorted the remaining young wizards into their respective houses. Until the last person. Every professor felt the dignified atmosphere in the teacher's seat. Dumbledore and the blonde old wizard stopped talking. The deans sat up straight, staring at Ian below. Trelawney's eyes were full of fear, and he muttered without knowing what to say. The professors except the dean are very confused. Hooch couldn't help asking Sprout. Who is this? Professor Dumbledore, why are they all serious? But no one answered her. Hermione has also been paying attention to Ian's branch, but at this moment she can feel that the atmosphere of the professors is completely different. Ian Grindelwald. When McGonagall's voice rang out in the auditorium. Then the little wizards who were talking and discussing suddenly fell silent. The students of the Pure Blood family who had received the news in advance also looked at Ian very cautiously at this time. The students who didn't get the news looked at Ian in shock. Is this the little wizard who didn't obey the school rules they've been talking about? Afterwards, louder discussions resounded throughout the auditorium. Grindelwald. Is it the Grindelwald in the book? I can't believe it. Is the principal joking with our lives? He's Grindelwald. Only the twins patted the sluggish Lee Jordan in front of them. Look, we are right. There are even bigger surprises. Dumbledore stood up, put the Elder Wand against his cheek, and said loudly. Quiet. After Dumbledore spoke, no one spoke anymore. Looking at the quiet auditorium, Dumbledore continued. Continue to sort. Then Dumbledore gave McGonagall a look. McGonagall understood and nodded to Ian. Ian then walked towards the Sorting Hat and McGonagall, took off his wizard hat, and slowly sat down on the chair. McGonagall prepared to put the Sorting Hat on Ian's head, and everyone waited with bated breath for the result. Because the Sorting Hat is too scared of Ian, when McGonagall almost touches Ian's head while holding the Sorting Hat. The Sorting Hat wanted to start shouting according to Dumbledore's account. But thinking that Flitwick gave too much. Ravenclaw! 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 It didn't stop shouting until McGonagall took it back. So close! He almost ran into the Dark Lord himself. Hearing the Sorting Hat yell Ravenclaw 3 times, Flitwick on stage laughed from ear to ear. Although there are outside tricks, but today their Ravenclaw Academy is the final winner. Chapter 38. Hearing that Ian is Ravenclaw, it's the turn of the Ravenclaw Academy's little wizard who erupts into cheers. Hermione stood up and applauded, seeing Ian was very happy. But there are also regrets. Dumbledore's face darkened. The Sorting Hat has betrayed. And Grindelwald smiled. McGonagall and Sprout looked regretful, but applauded Ian nonetheless. Ravenclaw can't live without Ian. Flitwick said it. Snape's face became even more gloomy. Ian didn't go to Slytherin. Quirrell paled when he heard the surname Grindelwald, and then he heard Voldemort whisper. If I take him in as a servant, my strength will be even stronger. Quirrell's clothes were wet with cold sweat. Cedric also applauded Ian with a smile on his face. The little wizard of Ravenclaw yelled. We have a Dark Lord. Welcome the Dark Lord to Ravenclaw. McGonagall looked at Ian and said with some regret. Congratulations, Ian. Ian shook his head and said regretfully. I wanted to study the Sorting Hat again. It's a pity it didn't give me a chance. McGonagall's face stiffened instantly, and he forced a smile and said. Ian, go sit down, the new term banquet is about to begin. Ian nodded and walked towards the teacher's seat. The students of Ravenclaw were just about to welcome Ian, but when they saw Ian walking towards the teacher, they were puzzled. Not only them, but the students sitting below don't know what Ian wants to do. Hermione was also very puzzled, but saw that there was still a place beside Dumbledore. She immediately thought of an answer. Hermione shook her head, impossible. He is the same age as himself, how could he sit there? Ian made his way to the teacher's desk, bypassing a stunned Quirrell. He nodded and greeted the deans. The heads all responded to Ian with smiles except Snape. Snape also nodded to Ian. Grindelwald raised his glass and smiled at Ian. Dumbledore smiled a little forcefully. Ian came to the seat next to Dumbledore under the eyes of everyone who couldn't believe it, and sat down. The mouths of the Cedric and Weasley twins seemed to fit a duck's egg. Cedric has only one thing on his mind. Ian is really a professor. Hermione also covered her mouth and looked at Ian in disbelief. He really is a professor. Dumbledore stood up the moment Ian sat down and announced. This year, we have 2 new professors at Hogwarts. They are, Assistant Principal from France, Jack Roger. And Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, Ian Grindelwald. What's special is that Professor Grindelwald needs to get a diploma from Hogwarts because of his age. Although this is the case, students, please still call Ian a professor. After all, your Defense Against the Dark Arts grades were graded by Professor Grindelwald. Also, please don't enter the rooms in the Forbidden Forest and the corridor on the 4th floor, if you don't want to die tragically. Finally. Stupid. Sniv. Scrap. Twist. Thank you all. Next. Let's enjoy the banquet. As Dumbledore's speech fell, a lot of delicious food appeared on the table. But no one cares about food now. The professors and little wizards who didn't know it because they heard Dumbledore's words went crazy. Professor Dumbledore. Is what you said true? This was the question of the uninformed professors. Dumbledore just smiled and said. The principals will explain it to you. Old man, I'm going to enjoy the dinner party. The 4 deans were immediately surrounded by professors. Want to find out the truth of the matter. And the little wizards are even crazier. Cool. Long live Professor Grindelwald. Can he teach? He's only in the 1st grade. Is the principal crazy? Anyway, black magic professors have always been unreliable. Maybe they will be replaced in a few days. Professor Roger might be a candidate. When Hermione first entered the Great Hall, she was with Professor Grindelwald. So Hermione became the most popular object in an instant. Looking at Ian, who was looking at her with a smile on the teacher's bench, Hermione realized at this moment the meaning of Ian's saying that he is special. Pursing her lips, Hermione said to Ian fiercely with her lips, "You wait for me." But the senior pure-blood wizards all had very serious expressions at this time. Grindelwald and French Roger appear at the same time. This is a big deal. Are the saints about to reappear? Draco looked at Ian on the professor's chair, panicked at this moment too. He didn't hear those words outside just now, right? Ronald turned even paler. What Harry said was actually true. Voldemort was now furious in Quirrell's head. He was actually robbed by this kid. I'm going to kill him. And Dumbledore is too confused. Quirrell couldn't contain the fear in his heart, so he could only play dumb in his seat. However, there are also some nervous people who have already started eating. When did the food at Hogwarts become so delicious? After the banquet, the prefects of each college took the students back to the common room. After Flitwick told the prefect of Ravenclaw, Ian lived in the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor's lounge. This made everyone in Ravenclaw very envious. The little witch looked at Ian, who was about to leave the auditorium, with a smile and waved to her. Hermione snorted and decided to settle the score with him tomorrow. Ian, isn't the little tail behind you with you today? In the evening, Dumbledore and Grindelwald waited for Ian's arrival in the headmaster's office. Grindelwald teased Ian, who had just walked in. Ian knew that Grindelwald couldn't say anything good, so he ignored him and asked directly. "What do you want me to do at this late hour?" Dumbledore nodded with a smile and said. "The teachers of the main courses have already set up levels in the rooms in the corridor on the 4th floor. I hope, Ian, you can lay out a level too. The difficulty should not be too high, as long as the little wizard can pass it smoothly. By the way, Ian, can you tell me the story of the little witch?" Chapter 39. Ian, Dumbledore and Grindelwald came to the room in the corridor on the 4th floor. Looking at the door that Dumbledore just opened, Ian complained. "Your broken door is simply a layer of locks, and no one can guard against it except the humanoid monster." Dumbledore laughed and said. "It was originally for young wizards to experience, it would be bad if they couldn't get in." Grindelwald nodded and said. "Ian, don't judge your standards by Hogwarts students. Otherwise, I doubt that you will get angry with the students." Ian didn't take Grindelwald's words to heart. After all, Cedric met in the car is very good. Although he is a top student, Ian is satisfied with other students who are half of his level. As everyone knows, the students will give him a big surprise tomorrow. Dumbledore looked at Ian's disapproving expression, and said to Ian. "Ian, you better listen to Gale on this one, he's absolutely right. Hogwarts has not had a reliable defense against the dark arts professor for a long time. Ian has seen Cedric's level, otherwise he was really deceived by these two old men. Okay, I'm here to set up levels today, not to discuss students." Ian shook his head impatiently, he was in a hurry to go back to sleep. Seeing that Ian kept persuading, Dumbledore and Grindelwald stopped persuading him. They knew tomorrow would be Ian's shock day. Dumbledore continued to Ian with a smile. "Tomorrow my plan is to have Hagrid bring a 3-headed dog over. Aren't you afraid of biting the little wizard? Injuries are inevitable during adventures, and I will put a curse on the 3-headed dog so that he won't hurt the little wizard's life." Ian nodded. "You are the principal and you have the final say." Then Dumbledore opened the underground trapdoor. Underneath is the Devil's Net arranged by Sprout, which is the magical plant that the first-year wizards must learn. And this will also prevent the reckless little wizard from jumping off and causing problems. The three of Ian continued to visit the levels of the professors. Ian finds it particularly interesting, especially McGonagall's wizard pieces. This led Ian to decide what to give McGonagall for Christmas. Next, before Ian entered the gate of the checkpoint, a strong stench came first. At this time, Dumbledore and Grindelwald have already performed the soaking spell. Ian glanced at the two of them angrily, and added a bubble head curse to himself. Next, Dumbledore cast the disillusionment curse on the three of them before walking into the level and introducing. "This is Quirrell's level, and he put 3 trolls here. Of course. He didn't find your farm when he went to catch the giant in the Forbidden Forest. Letting him design the level is to tell him that the Sorcerer's Stone will be here in the future." Ian nodded, but he still thought that creatures like trolls were disgusting. He just wants to leave early. Dumbledore took Ian into a back room and said. "I'm going to have Snape design the final level. But I think there needs to be a test of courage and knowledge before that. So I expanded the room with the No Trace stretch charm. Ian, I'll leave it to you." Ian nodded, and he thought for a moment before pulling out his wand. Wave the heart of Ian, and a table made of bones appears on the ground. Ian put a quill and a roll of parchment on the table. This book was made by him and intended to be used as tutoring for students. Just hold the quill and the magic inside will determine the little wizard's age. Then on the parchment in front of the little wizard there will be exam questions about creatures of darkness. Answer one question wrong and the parchment turns into this dark creature that got it wrong. You can't continue the exam until you beat it, and if you can't beat your score, that's the end of it. The creature transformed from parchment will not harm the students, but the pain of hitting does exist. As for senior wizards, there are also questions about black magic and dealing with dark wizards. If you answer wrong, you will be miserable. Ian also cast a curse on the door of the level, connecting the door with the parchment. The door will only open if you get an A, pass, or better. Ian's main thing is a torture. After Dumbledore waited for Ian to finish his introduction, his eyes lit up. Genius idea. Ian, can it be mass-produced? Ian rolled his eyes at Dumbledore, and said. It's very troublesome to make, and it needs to incorporate the souls of dark creatures, black magic, and the memories of wizards. And considering that it is used by students for tutoring, I have lowered the pain a lot. Until now, Ian has only produced a set. Grindelwald looked at Dumbledore and Ian with a smile. If you make this popular, the exam will be a nightmare for little wizards in the future. Hermione wasn't sleeping at this time either. Hermione didn't rest after returning to the lounge. Her roommates Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown frantically asked her about Ian. In fact, Hermione didn't know much about Ian, so she couldn't answer her roommate's question. But how could Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown possibly believe it? Who didn't see her following Professor Grindelwald all the time? Coupled with the fact that Hermione often offends people when she speaks, and has an unsocial personality, she is naturally isolated by the little wizards. Hermione found that her situation after coming to Hogwarts was similar to that in the Muggle world. She tucked herself under the covers and couldn't help but think of Ian. Here, she had her first friend, Ian Grindelwald. And Ian is her professor. In addition to the Sorting Hat, Ian has too many secrets in her eyes. It's Hogwarts curfew time now. Tomorrow, you must ask him carefully. Good night, Ian. The next day, Hermione got up very early, and she wanted to ask Ian about it today. Last night, the words of the Sorting Hat kept echoing in her mind. Why do you say Ian is a monster? Why does she need more courage? She must find out who her first friend, Ian, is. But Hermione, who came to the auditorium early, did not see Ian's figure. Only Professor Dumbledore and Sprout were eating breakfast at the teacher's table. Hermione was about to ask Dumbledore about Ian when suddenly a flock of owls flew into the auditorium. The chaotic scene shocked the students. But this situation did not last long. Most of the owls dropped the envelope on their paws in front of Dumbledore, and then flew away. After a while, there was a pile of letters piled up on the table in front of Dumbledore. Chapter 40. Sprout looked at the mountain of letters in front of Dumbledore, looked at Dumbledore helplessly and said, Professor Dumbledore, it seems word has spread about Ian. Dumbledore drew out his wand and waved it, the hilly letters disappeared in an instant, and said with a smile. It's fine, I'm sure Ian will take care of it. All I can do is help him stop the trouble outside. At this moment Dumbledore saw Hermione walking anxiously towards him beside him. Headmaster Dumbledore, are these letters because of Ian? Will Ian be expelled? Hermione had just vaguely heard Dumbledore say Ian's name, and ran to Dumbledore impatiently. Dumbledore looked at the anxious Hermione, looked at her kindly, and said, Son, don't worry, I won't fire Ian. I think I prefer to be called Professor. Hermione was relieved to hear Dumbledore's reply. Then Hermione asked again. Professor, do you know where Ian is? I didn't find him. Sprout next to Dumbledore laughed and said, Son, Ian has lessons this morning. Ian must have had breakfast in his lounge. And where is Ian's lounge? Dumbledore and Sprout smiled slightly at Hermione's impatience. It seems that Ian will have a little tale in the future, Dumbledore smiled. Ian's lounge is on the second floor of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Go get something to eat first, I think you'll see Ian after today's class. Too anxious will be hated by boys. Hermione blushed instantly. She hadn't expected Headmaster Dumbledore to say that. At this point Sprout went on to say, Professor Dumbledore, I don't think Ian will hate her, after all Ian is her professor now. Hermione blushed even more, seeing Dumbledore and Sprout very happy. Sprout smiled at Hermione and said, I am your professor of herbalism, Pomona Sprout. Have breakfast first, Miss Granger. Ian must be busy right now. It's his first class after all. Ian is currently preparing for his third-year Defense Against the Dark Arts class. The first class is the Hufflepuff and Gryffindor class. That means Cedric will be there. According to the third-grade course Black Magic, A Guide to Self-Defense, this book should have learned more dangerous dark creatures. According to the progress of the students, the common and easy-to-handle Grindylow can teach little wizards. Ian waved his hand and opened the black box next to the lectern. A large fish tank flew out of it. There are 3 green dwarf creatures in the fish tank. The lower body is like an octopus, with a triangular head and horns. It was 3 Grindylows. Ian packed some samples of some dark creatures into the classroom. He is also not afraid that the students' pranks will release dark creatures. There are many undead as guards on the first floor of the box. But who dares to play like this? Ian will definitely give him a black magic cure package. In this way, Ian reads a book and waits for the students in his bone professor chair. Soon after, footsteps and voices came from the professor's door. "Hey! Cedric, here you come. I wonder if Professor Grindelwald is a professor. I can assure you. Professor Grindelwald's class is taught by Professor Roger." The first to push open the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom were two boys, with Cedric behind. As soon as the door was opened, the students found that the familiar decorations were gone. The tables and chairs were all made of obsidian, and some areas seemed to be inlaid with bones as decorations. The chandelier on the top has become made of bones, and the flames burning faintly make it look very weird. On the left side of the classroom are the skeletons of many creatures, including humans. There is also a glass pool on the right, and it can be seen that there are things swimming in it. And Ian is sitting behind the bone podium, reading a book and waiting for them to arrive. The two boys who just entered the door looked at a completely different classroom and shouted excitedly. "Merlin's beard! This is so cool! Professor Grindelwald! Are those bones real?" Ian put down the book in his hand, looked at the two of them, and said with a smile. "Sit down quickly, we will start class when everyone is here. Also, those bone specimens are all real." Now the two are even more excited. "Start to keep looking at those skeleton specimens." Cedric greeted Ian with some restraint. "Professor, good morning." Ian nodded and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Diggory. I think we are still friends except in class." Cedric then relaxed, smiled at Ian and walked to a seat in the front row and sat down. The third-year Hufflepuff and Gryffindor students slowly made their way into the classroom. Everyone was amazed looking at the new renovation. But those bones on the left gave them a little chill. Also, there seemed to be something swimming in the water tank, which made them very curious. Seeing the students who came at about the same time, Ian put down the book in his hand and stood up. "Very well, it looks like no one is late or absent from class." Ian's voice sounded in the classroom, and he had already compared the number of people records. The students of Hufflepuff and Gryffindor had just withdrawn their attention from the classroom decoration. Seeing that the students were no longer distracted, Ian went on to say, "I don't know what your previous Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher taught you. But please pay attention in my class. Anyone who dares to pass can't do it. I don't mind letting him try the taste of hell." Hufflepuff and the students of Gryffindor froze. But thinking that Ian was still a little wizard, he looked at Ian with some disdain. Only Cedric was so nervous that his forehead was sweating. He knows Ian's strength, that is to say, what Ian just said is not a joke. Ian felt the soul fluctuations of everyone in the classroom. It seems that these little wizards won't be convinced by him if he doesn't show something. The students saw Ian snap his fingers. A crack in space appeared on the ground. The students didn't know what kind of magic it was, so they froze for a moment. But recalling Ian's spell casting without a wand or spell just now, they were shocked. Is this something a little wizard can do? Before they came back to their senses, they saw a hand with only bones protruding from the crack in the space. Chapter 41. A bone hand stretched out from the space crack. This scene scares Hufflepuff and Gryffindor's students. The skeletal hand grabbed the edge of the crack in the space and supported his body up bit by bit. The students feel cold all over their bodies. Because what climbed up was a human skeleton. Several timid female students have already hugged into a ball. And the few students near the left immediately ran away from the skeleton specimens. At this time, the skeleton has completely climbed up, and the purple soul fire in its eyes is burning blazingly. The skeleton is holding a staff in his hand and a broken mage robe on his body. "Mom! I'm scared. He's a dark wizard. No, the Dark Lord Grindelwald. Help, help!" A few of Hufflepuff's students had a mental breakdown of fear. Some students ran to the door of the classroom, but found that they couldn't open it no matter what. Cedric said tremblingly. Professor Grindelwald, what are you?" Ian looked at the flustered students and said quietly. "Is it enough? Now, quiet me and sit down." The skeleton mage next to Ian also roared. The frightened students quickly quieted down, and the crying students immediately suppressed their tears. The students found their seats and sat down immediately. Looking at the frightened students, Ian nodded and said, "Let me introduce, my name is Ian Grindelwald. Your defense against the dark arts teacher. I'm a necromancer, it doesn't matter if you don't know the word. In other words, I know more about the dark arts than anyone you know. If anyone dares to make something happen in my class, then I can congratulate you first." Seeing that the students no longer had the initial disdain, they only looked at Ian with fear in their eyes. Ian knew that his goal of standing up had been achieved, so he took back the skeleton mage with a wave of his hand, and this hand stunned the students again. It seems that this year's defense against the dark arts professor is really powerful. And he's a dark wizard. Now let's roll the roll. After writing down the names and soul marks of all the students, Ian began to lecture. Ian pointed to the little monster in the fish tank and asked, "Can someone tell me what this is?" After a long silence, only Cedric raised his hand tremblingly. "Mr. Diggory, you speak," Cedric said with a pale face. "It's Grindelow." "Professor." "Very good, 5 points for Hufflepuff." Ian nodded and continued. "Only Mr. Diggory knows. You usually don't preview first." At this moment, a Gryffindor girl raised her hand tremblingly. "Miss Garner, what do you want?" Garner took the courage to stand up and said, "Professor Grindelwald. We haven't learned this yet." "Professor Thomas, it's your previous professor who talked about ghouls." Ian was stunned when he heard this. Ghouls? This kind of dark creature is basically harmless and can even be used as a pet. P.S. Weasley has one at home. That's grade 1 in Ian's teaching schedule. Ian asked in disbelief. "That's it?" Garner nodded, "Yes, Professor." Ian finally knew what Dumbledore and Grindelwald meant yesterday. It's all about him teaching all students in this class as if they were freshmen. Ian sighed and said, "Please take a seat, Miss Garner." Garner sat down with relief. Ian looked around at the students, snapped his fingers, and the bone seat came to his feet. Ian sat down and said, "Let's talk today first. I didn't expect your foundation to be so poor. First question, what do you think defense against the dark arts is?" The students looked at each other. Cedric thought for a while and said, "Professor, I think defense against the dark arts means protecting yourself from dark creatures and black magic." Traditionally, 1 point for Hufflepuff. After hearing the conversation between Ian and Cedric, the students began to let go a little bit. Maybe the professor didn't have such a difficult thing to say? "Professor, I think it's a means to protect myself." "Professor, I think it's learning powerful magic." "Professor." The conversation that passed. The students found that Ian was not as difficult to speak as they thought. It's just that the magic is scary. But this also proves Ian's strength. This time the defense against the dark arts teacher is absolutely reliable. But Ian Grindelwald is definitely a dark wizard. After listening to the students, Ian said, "Remember, defense against dark arts is definitely not simply protecting yourself from dark creatures and black magic. Defense against the dark arts is to understand and study black magic and dark creatures and actually fight. You will only win if you know your enemy. Of course, this is what I ask of the best students. If you just want to get a good grade, just follow the textbook." At this point, Garner watched as Ian stood up and asked, "Professor, will you teach us your magic? That skeleton mage just now was terrifying. But if you use it yourself, it will be cool." Ian looked at the brave girl, smiled and said, "I will only teach the best students, you all have a chance. But the opportunity is for oneself." Hearing this, the eyes of the students shone brightly. After speaking, Ian stood up, looked at the students and said, "Get out of class is coming to an end, and we will speed up the tutorial in the defense against the dark arts class in 2 days. Remember to read the book first when you go back in these 2 days. Otherwise, you will not be able to keep up with the progress. If you want to try the tuition treatment, then you don't have to read the books." Hufflepuff and Gryffindor's students shuddered. After this lesson, Ian's power and terror quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. "Have you heard? Professor Grindelwald is a dark wizard. Professor Grindelwald is very powerful. He can release black magic without a wand or a spell. That skeleton is terrifying. But it's so handsome. I heard that as long as you get good grades, you can learn the magic taught by you. I don't believe it. Unless I see it with my own eyes. Listening to what the students were discussing, Harry and Ronald felt more and more that Professor Grindelwald was too scary. Chapter 42. It was Harry's first day of class today, but wherever he went in the morning, the students' discussions followed him, discussing his story. He had thought that the scary ghost and the mischievous Peeves were the most annoying. Until he and Ronald went the wrong way, trying to break into the restricted corridor on the 4th floor, and then was caught by Filch on the spot. They would have been on a day trip to Filch's office if Professor McGonagall hadn't helped them out. Now after the first period, Gryffindor's new students are preparing to enjoy lunch in the Great Hall. Hearing what the students were discussing, Harry and Ronald suddenly thought of the big devil in their hearts. Harry patted Ronald next to him with a sad face, and said, "The senior students seem to be talking about Grindelwald." Ronald also heard the discussion of the students. With a pale face, he replied, "Harry, Grindelwald is a dark wizard. We must expose his conspiracy." Hermione, who was behind the two, heard the discussions of the students around her, feeling happy and worried. But upon hearing Ronald's words, Hermione rushed up to the two of them like a lion, stopped them and said, "Ian is not a dark wizard. You all misunderstood him." Looking at the angry Hermione, Harry opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out. Ronald pouted and looked at Hermione disdainfully. "Who doesn't know that you are Grindelwald's little follower? Maybe you are still in the same group." Hermione became even angrier when she heard Ronald say this, and was about to refute the two, when Neville behind him summoned up the courage to pull Hermione, persuading, "Hey, Hermione, they won't listen. I believe Ian is a good man." Seeing that the situation was not good, Harry quickly dragged Ronald away. "I know, Neville. But they're horrible." Neville shook his head, his face was equally pale, and said, "Let's go to the auditorium first. Ian must be in the auditorium." Hermione just nodded and walked towards the auditorium. Ian sat on the professor's chair in the auditorium, and Dumbledore beside him smiled and asked, "Ian, how was your first day of class?" With a dark face, Ian said to Dumbledore, "Did all your previous defense against the dark arts professors have nothing to do? Teaching ghouls in the 3rd grade? I prefer to believe that his brains were eaten by ghouls." Dumbledore stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It's not up to me to decide. After all, there was a curse in the defense against the dark arts class before. I can't find a reliable professor even if I want to find one. Plus these professors will have problems every now and then, and there will be no one. Now I can only work hard on you." Ian rolled his eyes at Dumbledore, he knew it was true. He was about to say something more when he saw a figure with disheveled hair walking towards the teacher's seat. Dumbledore also saw this scene, and said playfully, "It seems that Ian has someone looking for you, maybe I should avoid it for a while." Ian ignored Dumbledore's teasing and looked at Hermione. Hermione walked up to Ian angrily, across the teacher's desk, and said, "Ian. They're all talking about you, saying you're a dark wizard." Hearing Hermione's words, Ian nodded and said, "I am indeed a dark wizard, they are right." Hermione looked at Ian in disbelief, and Ian actually admitted it. At this point Hermione started to feel overwhelmed, was she wrong? But recalling Ian's help to her, even though it was only a short day. Ian is always helping and encouraging her. Thinking of this, Hermione raised her head suddenly. "Look firmly into Ian's eyes," said loudly. "I trust you, Ian. We're friends." Hermione's words made the surrounding professors and little wizards all look over here. Dumbledore laughed and said to Hermione, "Son, just trust Ian, it doesn't matter if Ian is a dark wizard or not. It's Ian's choice, that's what matters." The greatest white wizard Dumbledore trusted Ian so much. Professor Flitwick on the side also smiled and said, "Ian is one of the people we trust the most. Also the pride of our Ravenclaw." After speaking, Flitwick straightened up and raised his chin. Dumbledore's original smiling face darkened instantly after hearing Flitwick's words. He only found out last night. Flitwick, the old fox, promised to give the Sorting Hat more than 10 latest ladies' hats. Hermione burst out laughing when she saw this. Ian also felt that Hermione's soul wave was growing more and more emotional towards herself. But very firm. Ian looked at Hermione with complicated eyes, and said, "Is it that simple to believe me?" Hermione snorted and said. Otherwise, you are not allowed to lie to me. Sensing Hermione's determined emotion again, Ian nodded earnestly. I promise. Hermione smiled even brighter, looked at Ian and asked. Then you can tell me why you can become a professor. Ian froze for a moment, then said seriously. Because I'm strong, stronger than anyone else. Hermione didn't believe him. Made a face at Ian and said. Bragging. Are you stronger than Professor Dumbledore? It is said in the book that Professor Dumbledore is the strongest wizard. The little wizards watching around also thought that Ian was joking. Little wizards who have seen Ian cast a spell think. Professor Grindelwald is really strong. But it's no good to say that it can be compared with Dumbledore. At this moment, Dumbledore said with a smile. Ian is definitely stronger than me in combat. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Hermione and the little wizards around felt the air freeze. Professor Dumbledore just said what? He seems to say that Grindelwald is stronger than him. Is that a lie? Hermione looked stiffly at Dumbledore, who nodded with a smile. At this moment, Hermione felt that the Ian in front of her was already an existence she couldn't even imagine. The little wizards around also exploded at this moment. Professor Dumbledore admitted. Is Professor Grindelwald really that powerful? So Professor Grindelwald is the most powerful wizard in the world. A legendary wizard who is only 11 years old. At this moment, McGonagall came up behind the little wizard, and said solemnly. I've heard a lot about Professor Grindelwald. There are also many doubts in it, but I can guarantee it. Professor Grindelwald is indeed the most powerful wizard today. Hermione just felt dizzy, and she completely forgot what she wanted to ask Ian. Chapter 43. Unlike Defense Against the Dark Arts professors are Muggle Studies professors. Professor Quirinus Quirrell has been wearing a purple hood around his head since the beginning of term. And his Muggle Studies class was full of garlic. It is extremely uncomfortable. According to one vampire he met in Romania, he was wearing a turban stuffed with garlic to prevent the vampire from coming back to take revenge on him. And Quirrell's language skills have become stuttering, which makes his lessons straight into jokes. After the baptism of this first day, all the students who took the Muggle Studies course regretted it. Did you know? Professor Quirrell stinks like a troll now. I really regret choosing Muggle Studies. Who knew that Professor Quirrell would become so unreliable? Only Quirrell himself knows that this is an image he deliberately designed. Just to paralyze Dumbledore. But he didn't know, Dumbledore already knew. Ian's got his shit out of him. Quirrell asked Voldemort in a trembling tone in the Muggle Studies office. Master, Master! I heard the students discussing Grindelwald today. Voldemort's feeble voice sounded in the empty room. Fool! Of course I know. Dumbledore is indeed old, and he admits that he is inferior to an 11-year-old boy. But the good thing is that Grindelwald is a dark wizard, so he must be interested in the Philosopher's Stone. Aren't you also in Harry Potter's hand? Of course, Quirrell only dared to think this way, and absolutely couldn't say it. Quirrell continued to ask respectfully. Then what do you need me to do, Master? Voldemort thought for a while, and said sharply. Lead him out of Hogwarts at night. Try his tricks. If I can, I'll take him as my servant. Quirrell immediately fell to his knees. Obey, my master. Ian, who just finished his 4th grade Defense Against the Dark Arts class in the evening, was going to the auditorium for dinner. The 4th-year wizards already knew what Dumbledore and McGonagall had said. They didn't dare to question Ian in class. After Ian showed them a magic spell without a staff and no spells, they completely believed the rumors of the little wizards. Professor Grindelwald is really a dark wizard. And very powerful. But that skeleton is really scary. Ian asked them to preview the course, and the students didn't dare to be sloppy. They don't want to experience what Ian called teaching is like, after all, he is a dark wizard. The threat from dark wizards is much stronger than ordinary professors. Just as Ian packed his textbooks and was about to leave, an owl flew into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, and there was a letter in the owl's talons. The owl dropped the letter on Ian's desk and flew away. Ian picked up the letter, without any names or logos on it. Only wrote one sentence. If you want to know about the Philosopher's Stone, come to the east of the Forbidden Forest 300 meters away. Remember, there is only you alone. Who else but Quirrell? Deans, who doesn't know that Ian can make the Philosopher's Stone by himself. When Ian saw the letter, fiend fire ignited in his hand and burned the letter. Ian knew that Voldemort wanted to test his skills. Seeing that Voldemort was looking for trouble, Ian decided to clean up Voldemort tonight and make him be more honest. Thinking of this, Ian waved his hand and locked the classroom, turning into a cloud of black mist and flying from the window to the Forbidden Forest. At this moment, Hermione came to the door of Ian's defense against the dark arts classroom after class. She was too shocked during the day and forgot to ask Ian about it. When she came to her senses, Ian had already gone back, and she had to eat quickly and go to class. Leave without saying a word. This time I will never end with you. Hermione murmured softly. When she came to the door of the defense against the dark arts classroom, she took a deep breath and knocked on the door. As a result, no one responded. Hermione stomped her foot, and he ran away again. Ian had already flown to the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and Snape gave him the magic. It's pretty handy on the go. It didn't take long for Ian to be where Quirrell said he was. Feeling the soul wave behind the tree ahead, Ian said, "Come out, don't hide." A man in black robe appeared behind the tree, and he hid his face and body under the black robe. Ian looked at him speechlessly. "Everyone except yourself knows that you are going to steal the Sorcerer's Stone." Ian wasn't going to expose him. What if he scared the rats away? Let Dumbledore play with him slowly. Quirrell said in a hoarse voice. "Ian Grindelwald, you have inherited a great family name, now I'll give you a chance. Sing allegiance to my master. He will analyze the secret of eternal life for you." Hearing this at the beginning, Ian decided to beat the two of them out today. Ian's face was dark, and he raised his hand to let the black mist escape from his cuffs. Quirrell was startled. He didn't expect Ian to release the magic without saying a word. Quirrell and Voldemort watched and sensed the evil aura of the black mist in front of Ian. Their eyes instantly became serious. "Quirinus, give me your body. He's not someone you can deal with. Looks like Dumbledore at least has some discernment." Voldemort and Quirrell exchanged control, and Voldemort gripped the spell tightly and looked towards the black mist. The black mist dissipated, and a withered corpse in gorgeous mage robes appeared in front of Ian. "Is this your little trick? A corpse?" Voldemort looked disdainfully at the withered corpse in ornate mage robes. I saw a sneer on the corner of Ian's mouth. The corpse also suddenly raised its head. The red soul fire in the eyes jumped crazily. Voldemort and Quirrell suddenly felt a chill hit them. An extremely palpitating feeling appeared in the hearts of Voldemort and Quirrell. "Go beat him out of me." The withered corpse turned its head, bowed to salute Ian, and a strange voice sounded. "Lich, Cos Nane obeys." Voldemort wanted to see what kind of black magic Ian was using. But at this moment, he no longer dared to procrastinate, raised his wand and threw out a spell. Avada Kedavra. Green light hits Ian and Cos Nane. Cos Nane turned around with a strange smile and raised his withered hand. A black curse flew towards Avada Kedavra. Death withers. The black spell swallowed the green light in an instant, and then flew towards Voldemort. Voldemort's hairs stood on end at this moment, and he flew to the side. The black spell grazed Voldemort's ear, flew past and slammed into a tree behind him. At the moment of the hit, the tree withered at an extremely fast speed and turned into a ball of fly ash. Chapter 44. Voldemort looked at the place hit by the black curse from the corner of his eye, and instantly felt glad that he didn't overdo it. What the hell is that spell? It can actually swallow the killing curse. What the hell are you? Cos Nane ignored Voldemort's question and shot a spell towards the ground. I saw the spell spread out the moment it touched the ground. Voldemort's palpitations got worse. Now he is just a remnant soul, and the power he can use is limited. With the help of Quirrell's body, he will definitely not be able to defeat this weird corpse in front of him. Voldemort immediately planned to use apparition to escape. But he found it impossible to use the spell at all. For the first time, a terrified expression appeared on Voldemort's face. "Just listen to Cos Nane's hoarse voice and say, 'Bugs. The master said to beat you out, so don't even think about running away. The spell just now is to prevent you from using space magic to escape. If I let you run away, I won't be able to hold my head up.'" After speaking, Cos Nane waved his hand, and many black thorns emerged from Voldemort's feet to bind him. Voldemort didn't dare to think any more, he could still move with his hands propped up, and continued to wave his wand. Fire and blaze! Fierce fire poured out of Quirrell's wand, turning into a giant snake, and pounced on Kothnan. Kosnane looked at the giant snake formed by fiend fire with great interest, and praised. Fun magic! Kosnane waved his hand and a black smoke appeared, in which many roaring human faces could be seen. Despair release! The two curses collided immediately. A huge explosion leveled the surrounding area. Voldemort was already lying on the ground covered in injuries, and the blackthorns were constantly absorbing Quirrell's vitality. Kosnane was still intact, walking in front of Voldemort. Kosnane said with a strange smile. Then let's start to complete the mission of the Master now. After speaking, he raised his foot and kicked Quirrell's belly. Ah! There was a shrill scream, and Voldemort and Quirrell felt the kick was magical and rushed straight to his stomach. Dumbledore and the professors were dining in the Great Hall when suddenly there was a loud explosion from the direction of the Forbidden Forest. The students in the auditorium were frightened and panicked. Dumbledore and the professors looked serious. Such a huge explosion should be caused by a spell. Ian and Quirrell didn't dine in the auditorium either. Dumbledore stood up and said to the students. The prefects and the professors of the colleges take the students back to their dormitories. Professor Rozier and I. After finishing speaking, Dumbledore nodded to the professors, and walked out of the auditorium with Grindelwald. What happened to the explosion just now? I don't know. But it seems very dangerous. You see that Professor Grindelwald has not come, do you think it will be him? Hearing the conversation of the little wizards, Hermione looked at the vacant seat on the teacher's bench, feeling extremely worried in her heart. At this time, the saints in the Dark Creature Farm also heard the explosion. Moss, bring someone. Let's go and see. Hearing Andy's words, Moss nodded, summoned good people and rushed towards the direction of the explosion. Dumbledore and Grindelwald looked at Quirrell, who was lying on the ground and twitching in front of them, and the Lich Kosnane beside Ian felt extremely headache. Meanwhile Quirrell still had filth under his crotch. Ian, why did you fight with him? Grindelwald asked, puzzled. Ian spread his hands and said. He asked me to join the Death Eaters. His tone was so bad that I couldn't help it. I let Kosnane do it. Dumbledore didn't care about Rocky, who was underground, looked at Kosnane next to Ian and asked. Is his name Kosnane? I feel that he is different from other undead. Ian explained to Dumbledore. Kosnane is a lich, the highest level of undead. I don't have much either. At this moment Kosnane saluted Dumbledore and Grindelwald and said. Kosnane is the Master's servant. Say hello to the Master's friend. Feeling the magic flow from Kosnane, Dumbledore and Grindelwald did not dare to take it lightly. How many cards does this kid Ian have? At this time, the saints also arrived, and seeing Kosnane next to Ian was also taken aback. Andy hurried over to Ian and asked. What happened, sir? And, is he? Ian introduced Kosnane to the saints and explained what happened just now. Only then Andy and the saints breathed a sigh of relief, because Kosnane put too much pressure on them. Andy and Moss frowned and looked at Quirrell on the ground. Sir, so this is Voldemort, the rat? Ian nodded and said. He is Voldemort's parasitic Horcrux, and now both Voldemort and him have fainted. A cold look flashed in Andy's eyes, he drew out the magic spell, and asked. Should I kill him now? Ian was silent for a while, looking at Dumbledore and Grindelwald. Kill it, I guess I won't survive. The Death Thorn has absorbed too much of his vitality. Dumbledore and Grindelwald were also silent. After a while Dumbledore sighed and said. It seems that I can't experience the little wizard anymore. I'm looking forward to that adventure. Ian, is there anything you can do? Ian glanced at Dumbledore, then at Quirrell on the ground, and said. I'll make a puppet out of Voldemort's remnant soul. But the soul container made of the flesh and blood of dark creatures can only last for 1 year. In this way, those arrangements of yours will not fail. Grindelwald nodded and said. That's the only way, Ian. What are you going to do with Kosnane? It's amazing for others to see this. Ian scratched his head, looked at Grindelwald and said. Just take back my mental space. This is where Ian exclusively stores top-tier undead and weapon armor. After all, Ian took back Kosnane. Grindelwald looked at this scene and sighed. Sure enough, your magic is convenient. With your magic at that time, I would have beaten New York for him a long time ago. With that, Grindelwald glanced at Dumbledore. Dumbledore ignored Grindelwald and asked Ian. Ian, to what extent can the puppet you make do? Ian thought for a while and said. About 80% of the strength of the remnant soul, which can limit the output of magic power and the use of magic. Safety than your Quirrell makeshift Horcruxes. Chapter 45. Voldemort feels very unlucky recently. Refining potion blew up and injured myself, was chased and bitten by dark creatures, magic went out of control intermittently, and other unlucky situations. He also had a nightmare yesterday, being chased and beaten by a dark magic creature released by a little wizard named Ian Grindelwald. The scary thing is that the black magic creature can use magic. And it was all black magic that he had never seen before. He has always regarded himself as the Dark Lord, but yesterday he was hanged and beaten by a black magic creature with black magic. In the end, he was beaten alive. Although I am a remnant soul, it is not like this. He is the greatest Dark Lord ever. The scariest dark wizard in modern times. Fortunately, I woke up now. Voldemort opened his eyes slowly, and saw a familiar office. Still dreaming. The old man Dumbledore's office is still the same. Then Voldemort heard a voice that kept him up at night. Tom, you're finally awake. Are you still used to this body now? Voldemort's drowsiness disappeared in an instant, and he opened his eyes wide, looking at Dumbledore in front of him. Dumbledore. Damn Quirrell. Exposed. Just when Voldemort wanted to escape, he found that he couldn't move his head at all. Dumbledore looked at the panicked Voldemort and said. Don't even think about running away, Ian made you a body. It should be what you need for you now, right? Hearing Dumbledore's words, Voldemort froze. Wait, Ian? Ian Grindelwald. What happened yesterday was not a dream. Only then did Voldemort look at his body hastily. I saw that his current body is exactly the same as when he was young. And even if he is a remnant soul, he still has power. Ha ha ha. Stupid Dumbledore. You're going to make me a body. Dumbledore. Grindelwald. I'll kill you all. I am the greatest Dark Lord. While Voldemort was laughing wildly, Dumbledore took out a crystal ball from the drawer. It seems to be used like this. I saw Dumbledore pouring a touch of magic into the crystal ball. Voldemort on the opposite chair immediately shut up, and could only make a woohoo sound. Seeing Voldemort like this, Dumbledore felt much better. Then Dumbledore said. Let me explain to you first, what Ian made for you is called a puppet body. It can accommodate part of the soul's time. Your body is also completely under my control, so don't have any bad thoughts. Now, I think we can have a good talk. In the evening, after Ian helped Dumbledore make the puppet of Voldemort's remnant soul, he went directly to the experiment site of the farm. Voldemort's remnant soul was also cut off by him, and he wanted to see if he could use the remnant soul to create an emotional undead. Voldemort's soul is full of negative emotions such as madness and anger, which is the best material. Moss, record the data. Yes, sir. Moth waved his wand, and the parchment and quill beside him floated. Ian injected magic power into Voldemort's remnant soul, and Voldemort's remnant soul began to tremble. Then Ian began to use magic power to stimulate the emotions of Voldemort's remnant soul, and the negative emotions in the remnant soul began to grow wildly. A few minutes later, Voldemort's remnant screamed horribly. It exploded into pieces with a bang. Failed. Ian said, shaking his head. At this moment, Ian felt that the fragments of the remnant soul seemed to have entered a certain place. It stands to reason that the soul should dissipate directly. In this world, Ian collects souls and makes them into undead every time. But this time Voldemort's remnant soul had been blown to pieces, it was useless to him, so he didn't collect it anymore. Suddenly feeling such a situation, Ian immediately decided to see where the pieces went. Moss. You go out first. Don't let anyone in. This time Moth was the most serious since meeting Ian. Moss looked into Ian's eyes and said seriously. I will never let anyone disturb sir. Ian nodded and watched Moth walk out of the room. Ian took out many precious magic materials and drew a magic circle in the room. Then Ian took out the soul of Quirinus Quirrell he had just collected, and let go of its bondage. Use magic power to connect the soul to the magic circle. It didn't take long for the soul to be pulled somewhere by the void. Then the magic circle was activated by Ian immediately. After a whirlwind, Ian opened his eyes again. He came to a pure white train station corridor. Ian looked around and found two souls under the seat at the station. One was Voldemort's mutilated soul, curled up like a skinless dwarf. The other one is the soul of Quirinus Quirrell that Ian just released. Looks like I found the right place, Ian murmured. Dumbledore announced Quirrell's death at breakfast the next day. Last night, Quirinus Quirrell's son-in-law blew himself up doing magic experiments in the Forbidden Forest. The little wizards who heard the news felt very sad. On the second day of school, a professor killed himself. Historically, only the professor of Hogwarts Defense Against the Dark Arts class blew himself up. It was the first time in the history of Hogwarts that the professor of Muggle Studies blew himself up. Only the deans knew the truth. Voldemort was gone before he could make trouble this time. It was terrible to be beaten by Ian, and now it is still made into a puppet and left on the 4th floor as a tool to break through the level. Hermione hadn't seen Ian this morning, and she hadn't found him last night, so she was always on tenterhooks. She wasn't relieved until she heard that it was Professor Quirrell who had the accident and not Ian. But at this time, Grindelwald, who was in the teacher's seat, received a letter from a saint. Grindelwald frowned, and wrote in the letter. Mr. has been doing magic experiments all night, but there is no movement in the experiment room. Knocking on the door and getting no reply. In the end, Mr. just told Moth not to let anyone disturb him. Grindelwald had a bad feeling after reading the letter. Albus. Go to the farm. Moss is about to collapse, no matter what, there is no movement in Mr. S. laboratory. The saints outside the door are also going crazy, sir, nothing can happen. Here comes Grindelwald and Dumbledore. How's the situation? Grindelwald asked hurriedly. Sir, there is still no movement. Dumbledore said with a dark face. Get out of the way. Ian has nothing to do. Moss stopped Dumbledore hastily and said. Sir said no one should be allowed in. You. Dumbledore was about to lose his temper. There was a sound of falling and knocking over experimental equipment in the laboratory. Both Dumbledore and Grindelwald couldn't bear it anymore and rushed in. Knocking open the door of the laboratory, I saw Ian fell to the ground with injuries. Dumbledore saw a black finger on Ian's hand. In the other hand was holding a soul. Suddenly Dumbledore's pupils constricted and his whole body trembled. That spirit was Ariana Dumbledore. Ian took a breath. Looking at the people in front of him with a forced smile, he said. It hurts? The one in your world is also called the God of Death, right? There was a fight, and I cut off one of his fingers. This soul has an aura similar to yours, Dumbledore, and I snatched it back. Chapter 46. Dumbledore was trembling all over, and Grindelwald and the saints were also shocked. Got into a fight with the Grim Reaper? That black finger is the God of Death? And that soul is Ariana Dumbledore. The trigger for his break with Dumbledore. Also the beginning of misfortune for the Dumbledore family. Grindelwald asked in shock. Ian. You say that's the finger of death? Ian felt sore all over his body, with large and small black magic wounds all over his body. He lay weakly on the ground and said. Could have cut off a piece of his arm, but damn it. There is a force of law that threw me back. Hold your finger, Grindelwald. I'll give you the soul first, Dumbledore, I taught you how to keep it. Ian passed out after speaking, his magic power was almost exhausted. When he woke up again, Ian had already returned to his big golden-red bed, surrounded by professors around him. Ian's awake! Flitwick exclaimed in surprise. The professors suddenly stopped discussing and looked at Ian. McGonagall smiled at Ian, and immediately went to inform Dumbledore. Next to Ian was Snape, and it looked like Dumbledore had asked Snape to heal him. Ian sensed that Snape's emotions were complicated, but very excited. Ian rubbed his aching head and asked, How long have I been asleep? Grindelwald spoke first. Ian, you slept for 6 hours, it's almost afternoon class. Ian smiled and joked. It seems that I haven't missed the class time, Dumbledore should not deduct my salary. Flitwick said aloud worriedly. You still want to go to class? Do you know that we are all worried to death? Ha ha ha, isn't this dead? Grindelwald took out the black finger and interjected. Ian, is this really the finger of death? Hearing Grindelwald's question, the professors suddenly fell silent, and all looked at Ian, hoping for an answer. Ian nodded under the gaze of the professors. Yes. The professors all took a breath. Sprout said worriedly. It seems that the rumors of the god of death are true. The stories in the tales of Beetle the poet may be true. Compared to the worries of the professors, Grindelwald was so excited that he burst into tears. His ideal of collecting the 3 Deathly Hallows when he was young is not fake. Grindelwald asked tremblingly. Ian, can you tell me about the situation? Ian nodded and said. I followed Quirrell's spirit into a white station space. Follow the train track and fly to the depths. At the end there is a black space, where the god of death is. He is wearing a black robe, and his body is like a lich. There are a lot of souls out there, but most of them are sleeping. He saw that I was an intruder, and then I fought with him, and my undead army and his soul army also fought. Although my undead is much stronger, but there are too many souls, I can only break through and kill him first. The liches and I were almost able to kill him. But at the critical moment, a force of law stopped me. Then I was thrown back, only in time to chop off one of his fingers and snatch the soul that was very similar to Dumbledore's breath. You all know later. After listening to Ian's words, the professors were silent. After all, the shock was too great. Ian almost killed Grim Reaper? At this moment Snape spoke, and Snape's face that had never changed for thousands of years had become extremely emotional at this moment, and said. Ian, I have a request. I'll give anything. Even if it's my life. Ian barely raised his hand to pat Snape and said. If you want the soul of that space, I'm afraid you can't do it now. I feel that the traces of that space are starting to hide from me. It's that inexplicable law power again. Snape felt extremely regretful at once, but still looked up. Snape looked at Ian seriously and said. I can wait. Let me know if you need anything in the future. Even if it's my life, you can take it at any time. Now it was the turn of the professors to be astonished. Just when the professors wanted to question Snape, the door to Ian's lounge was pushed open by Dumbledore. Dumbledore and McGonagall walked in quickly. Dumbledore looked at Ian gratefully, and said. Ian. I just saved my soul. Thank you. Ian interrupted Dumbledore, saying. You don't need to thank you or anything. You also helped me a lot. I just found out and took it back. Hearing Ian's words, Dumbledore gave Ian a big gift under the disbelieving eyes of the professors. Only Grindelwald looked at the two with a smile. These are all his family members. Ian rolled his eyes at Dumbledore, and said. Old man, you are over 100 years old. According to Dongfeng. You are not afraid of my life being shortened. Dumbledore laughed. You also have to pay more attention to yourself, don't take risks alone. We 2 old men are at least somewhat useful. Grindelwald next to him nodded with a smile and said. Dumbledore's right. Sometimes we old bones need to move. The professors also looked at Ian and nodded. The words of Dumbledore and Grindelwald touched Ian very much. Through the perception of the soul, he knew that even if he had to go to the god of death for a while, Dumbledore and Grindelwald they will definitely go with him. He used to be alone all the time, now, he also has a family. Dumbledore looked at Ian, then said. There is also a little witch who didn't see someone today, but she has been talking to me, an old man, all morning. Ian ignored the old gossip Dumbledore and chatted with the professors. The most worried about Ian can be said to be Flitwick and McGonagall, both of whom have repeatedly emphasized that Ian is not allowed to take any more risks. Later Dumbledore and McGonagall asked about Dead Space. Grindelwald recounted it to Dumbledore. Dumbledore sighed. It seems that the legends are all traceable. Now that Ian is awake, the professors are going back to class in the afternoon. After the professors left, Grindelwald gave Ian the finger of death and asked. Ian, what are you going to do with this? Ian sensed that the finger of the god of death is still connected with that space, and said. After saving it, I feel that the finger is still connected with that space. When I find a way, I will go again. He lost hundreds of thousands of undead and 2 liches this time. If he doesn't get back the scene, he can't bear this tone. Then we 2 old men will accompany you there. Chapter 47. Dumbledore and Grindelwald didn't stay with Ian for too long, so they let Ian rest. The black magic wounds on Ian can only be healed by Ian himself. After all, no one knows more about black magic than he does. Ian estimated that with his spell and the potion left by Snape, it would take about a day to heal. This is also the credit that Ian can transform the soul into life force. Otherwise, he will stay in bed for a month. Afternoon class. Dumbledore had asked Snape to take Ian's place. However, the news of Ian's injury was covered up, and the professors all confessed that Ian had something to go out. After all, the news of the god of death and the soul is of great importance. Not everyone is qualified to know. Snape, who received the news, was very happy once in a while. This is his dream position. Then the little wizards in the 5th grade in the afternoon were unlucky. They have always wanted to see how powerful and terrifying Professor Grindelwald is, who has been rumored outside. Finally, it was their turn to go to class, and as soon as they walked in, they saw Snape on the bone teacher's chair. Snape is very satisfied with Ian's decoration style. This is the proper decoration style for defense against the dark arts class. Those limp professors in the past didn't know what black magic was. The students despaired when they saw Snape in the defense against the dark arts classroom. Only the Slytherin students cheered. Looking at the students who were stunned at the door, Snape said quietly, "What are you still doing? Come in and sit down." At this time, Dumbledore's office also ushered in a group of pure-blood wizards. The Hogwarts school trustees headed by Lucius Malfoy are preparing to collectively protest Dumbledore's behavior of letting Ian be the professor of defense against the dark arts. Why can a little wizard be the main course professor at Hogwarts? Their children are also studying at Hogwarts. Not to mention the recent rumors that Ian Grindelwald is also a powerful dark wizard. Behind this is the shadow of the French Roger family. This is what they cannot tolerate. After Lucius Malfoy and others stepped into the principal's office, ignoring Grindelwald on the side, he directly questioned Dumbledore behind the headmaster's desk. "Dumbledore, I think you need to give us an explanation." Lucius Malfoy spoke first. Dumbledore looked at the menacing pure-blood family members, smiled and said, "I am the headmaster of Hogwarts, of course I have this power." Hearing Dumbledore's words, Lucius sneered. "Stop kidding, Dumbledore, we appointed you to be the headmaster. We have no objection to the admission of Ian Grindelwald. But behind Ian Grindelwald is French Roger. If you can't give us a satisfactory answer, we may not be able to satisfy you either." Dumbledore didn't speak, but Grindelwald picked it up and waved it. The faint blue fiend fire enveloped the principal's office. Grindelwald said provocatively, "Oh? What explanation do you need from us?" Grindelwald's magic frightened everyone in the pure-blood family. "Unleash the advanced fierce fire curse without a stick or a spell." Lucius and the others turned pale instantly. Feeling the temperature of fiend fire, Goyle asked tremblingly, "Dumbledore. Roger. What are you going to do?" Grindelwald looked at the terrified Lucius and said mockingly, "Are you still wizards? Grab your wands. If you can win, Dumbledore and I will listen to you." Lucius and the others were even more frightened. What kind of hell joke is this? Hands-on with Dumbledore? Their masters dare not. Not to mention that the French Jack Roger seems to be very powerful too. Just when Lucius and others were at a loss, Dumbledore stood up and patted Grindelwald on the shoulder. Grindelwald understood what Dumbledore meant, and waved his hand again to extinguish fiend fire. Lucius and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Looks like Dumbledore is still the old man who bound himself. Just when Lucius was about to continue asking Dumbledore for an explanation, Dumbledore looked at them sharply. "Jack means what I mean. Times are different now. Either raise your wands, or get the hell out of Hogwarts." Now Dumbledore didn't have to worry about longevity anymore. Voldemort was no match for him and Grindelwald. Not to mention a stronger Ian. His only regret was also brought back by Ian. Ian's prophecy that Grindelwald showed him is not something he can stop. In this way, Dumbledore has no reason to restrain himself. At this moment, everyone in Malfoy turned pale. They know that the Lion King is out of the cage. No matter how unwilling Lucius and the others were to accept the reality, they could only go home in despair. Damn Dumbledore! Now he's not restraining himself. As soon as Lucius got home, he said to Narcissa Malfoy angrily. Narcissa frowned and said, "Lucius, calm down first." Hearing his wife's words, Lucius calmed down a little. Seeing that Lucius calmed down a little, Narcissa asked, "What happened at Hogwarts?" Lucius then told Narcissa what happened today. After hearing this, Narcissa broke out in a cold sweat. She was also afraid that Dumbledore would no longer restrain himself and settle accounts with them. Although their family spent a lot of money to buy people from the Ministry of Magic, this saved Azkaban from suffering. Suddenly remembering her son Draco, Narcissa exclaimed, "Where is Draco? Will Dumbledore be against Draco?" Lucius thought for a while with a pale face, and said, "Dumbledore will not shoot at students, and in the current situation, Hogwarts is the safest. Draco will be fine." Hearing this, Narcissa breathed a sigh of relief. But the two are still worried about the future. Voldemort was already a nightmare for the two of them, and now Dumbledore was added. Voldemort, the French Roger family, Albus Dumbledore, Ian Grindelwald. Lucius no longer knows what the future holds. Chapter 48. After returning, everyone in the pure-blood family fell into deep worry just like Lucius. Dumbledore untethered was no match for them. Those school managers did not dare to break Hogwarts' capital chain. Not to mention that their family's children go to Hogwarts. They couldn't afford to have Dumbledore, untethered, come to settle accounts with them. As for the Ministry of Magic, those were dogs from their pure-blood family. There is nothing they can do as masters, let alone the dogs they raise. Just when the pure-blood family was wailing. First-year Gryffindor and Slytherin wizards have their first defense against the dark arts class. Because it was Ian's schedule, he deliberately put the first-year Gryffindor and Slytherin houses together. He is also very curious about what it would be like for the protagonist and the villain in the original book to be together, love each other and kill each other. Hearing the rumors about Professor Grindelwald from the senior students these days, the first-year freshmen are already extremely curious about this legendary professor of their age. But there are often a few misfits in the crowd. Harry and Ronald felt that taking defense against the dark arts was like going to the execution ground. "Harry, are we going to Grindelwald's class?" Ronald was on the verge of crying, and he still couldn't escape the day. Harry's expression was not much better, and he said, "Ronald, I heard it was Professor Snape's class yesterday, maybe it's still Snape today." Although Snape didn't seem to like him very much at the beginning of school. He felt like Snape wanted to rip his face off when he saw it. But at least Snape wasn't summoning skeletons to put knives on someone's neck. At the same time Draco was afraid that Ian had heard the bad things he said that day. "Gregory, Vincent, if something happens in a while, remember to contact my dad." Gregory Goyle and Vincent Crabbe were equally pale. Because if something happened to Draco, then as Draco's followers, they probably wouldn't end well. Hermione had been on edge since Dumbledore said yesterday that Ian had something to do with leaving Hogwarts. "I don't know if Ian is attending her long-awaited defense against the dark arts class today." With everyone's thoughts mixed, Hermione opened the door of the defense against the dark arts classroom first. Looking inward, except for the oppressive classroom environment, I saw Ian sitting in the professor's seat, smiling and waving to her. It was only at this moment that Hermione felt relieved. Harry and Ronald in the back turned pale with fright when they saw Ian for the first time. Draco's face was extremely tangled, whether he should skip class or not. But when he thought that there was at least one semester of courses ahead, he gave up the idea of dying. If Snape wrote to his dad that he'd skipped school, he wouldn't want any of his pocket money. With completely different emotions, the little wizards came to their seats and sat down. Hermione sat directly in the middle of the first row. And Harry, Ronald, and Draco sat at the back. The layout of the classroom made them feel that this is a devil's lair. The three just hope Ian doesn't see them. After a day of recovery, the black magic wound on Ian's body has basically healed. But it also took a lot of his soul. Ian saw that the little wizard had already sat down, so Ian got up and said, "Welcome to the classroom of defense against the dark arts class. I'm sure many of you already know me, I'm Ian Grindelwald. In class, I hope you can call me Professor Grindelwald. I can teach you to recognize dark creatures and guard against black wizards' black magic. Even teach you how to make dark magic creatures. But it's for gifted students. This is your first defense against the dark arts class. I don't plan to say too much, I hope you can listen to the class well and complete your homework. If anyone dares not to do their homework and fail the exam in defense against the dark arts class, I will let the skeleton watch him do his homework. After speaking, Ian waved his hand and summoned a skeleton soldier. The little wizards screamed in fright. Hermione's face was also pale, but there was not much fear in her eyes, and she was more curious about magic. And Harry and Ronald were so frightened that they sat down on the ground. That's a human skeleton. It was this skeleton who put the knife on Uncle Vernon's neck. Draco was born in a pure-blood family, and he has heard of some black magic. But this was the first time he had seen a living skeleton. Especially that skeleton's eyes seemed to still be burning with flames. This made him yearn for it while being afraid. This is much cooler than his slapstick fights. At the same time Draco glanced at Harry, who had fallen to the ground with his red-haired squire. This made him feel better immediately. And vowed to learn this magic. Seeing the reaction of the little wizards, Ian knew that it was almost done, and waved his hand to put the skeleton away. Before Ian could speak, Hermione raised her hand. Ian sensed from her emotions that she wasn't that scared. Also very curious, and curious about Ian himself. "Miss Granger, what's the question?" Hermione stood up and asked quickly. Professor Grindelwald. What is the magic just now? Is it black magic? Why does that skeleton move?" Ian smiled and replied. "Yes, Miss Granger, it's dark magic. This magic is called skull summoning. Skeleton is a kind of undead creature, and it can also be said to be a black magic creature." Hermione and Draco had this magic firmly in their minds. One is to get to know Ian a little closer. One thinks it's very cool, and it can scare his most hated pote. Hermione looked into Ian's eyes expectantly and continued asking. "Then can we learn this magic, Professor?" Ian nodded and shook his head again, and said. "Black magic is very corrosive to the soul. If you don't have a very strong will to learn the black arts, you will only become a madman like Voldemort." Hearing Voldemort's name, most of the little wizards were frightened and dared not move. Chapter 49. Voldemort was in this generation, and his name could stop a child from crying. Only some young Muggle-born wizards don't know the meaning of this name. Hermione's face was also pale. She read a lot of books, so she naturally knew that this was the scariest dark wizard in modern Britain. Ian looked at the pale little wizards and shook his head, and continued. "Voldemort is just a dark wizard, and you are scared like this," Hannah said in a trembling voice. "But he killed a lot of people." Ian heard Hannah's voice, and then said seriously. "He killed a lot of people. But that's because they were too weak. One dark wizard with no brains made the British wizarding world like this. You have to remember, we are wizards, and wizards are the most powerful. Like the Hogwarts motto, do not disturb the sleeping dragon, Draco dormiens nunquam titilandus. As long as you have enough strength, you can protect everything you cherish." When Hermione heard Ian's words, she raised her head, her eyes sparkled, and asked. "Professor, will you teach us powerful magic?" Ian looked at Hermione, scanned the little wizards around again, and said seriously. "I will teach you, but I will only teach my magic to a good student. The opportunity was not given to me. You fought for it yourself." When Harry first heard Ian's words, he was very angry. Harry knew that Voldemort killed his parents. He wanted to stand up and question Ian, but he heard what Ian said behind him. Those words hit his heart like a heavy hammer. Nothing came out of Harry's open mouth. Neville also thought of that tragic night, and a fiery light gradually lit up in his eyes. In this way, a small seed was planted by Ian into the hearts of the little wizards present. With time and nutrition, this seed can grow into a towering tree. After class, Harry's heart could not be calm for a long time. Ian Grindelwald, is he really what he says? Ronald's focus is obviously different from his, just listen to him say. Grindelwald's magic is terrifying. I don't know what Principal Dumbledore thinks, he actually found a dark wizard to teach us. Harry heard Ronald's words, turned his head to look at Ronald, and said seriously. Ronald, I think what Professor Grindelwald said makes sense. Ronald's eyeballs almost popped out when he heard Harry's words. Is this still Harry on his side? Harry looked at Ronald's expression, shook his head, and said. Ronald, you are my first friend, please trust me. But what Professor Grindelwald said makes a lot of sense. Voldemort killed my parents, if I have strong strength, I can seek revenge from him. When Ronald heard Harry's words, he didn't know how to comfort Harry, and he was a little at a loss. Seeing Ronald's situation, Harry grabbed Ronald and said, "Ronald, we are not thinking about this matter, now we need to go to the auditorium to eat." Hermione stayed in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, looked at Ian and asked, "Where did you go the other day? Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall won't tell me either." Ian looked at the worried little witch in front of him and said with a smile, "I went to study magic, and there was a little accident, which delayed me for a day." Hermione became even more anxious when she heard Ian's words. "Where are you hurt? Let me see." As he spoke, he grabbed Ian's hand. Ian felt her anxiety, and thought that some friends were worried about it. Dumbledore, Grindelwald and the professors worried about him more like elders. As for Hermione, she cared differently. Although some were afraid of losing Ian, her only friend, most of them were still worried about her friend, and there was a little more emotion that Ian didn't understand. And Hermione's emotions towards him were mostly admiration and curiosity. Not hearing Ian's words, Hermione thought there was something wrong with Ian. But as soon as she looked up, she saw Ian smiling at her. Only then did she realize that she anxiously held Ian's hand. Hermione's face turned red immediately, and she shook off Ian's hand. Ian stroked Hermione's disheveled hair and said, "I'm almost fine, don't worry. It's almost time to eat. If you don't eat well, you won't grow tall." Today was the last day of class for Hermione's first week at Hogwarts. She found that every professor was friendly to her, including Professor Snape in potions. Harry had been being targeted by Snape in potions class today. It was said that Snape didn't like Gryffindor's students, but Snape was very patient when asking questions and teaching her. Also Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick and Professor Sprout. They always put more eyes on themselves. And when guiding her, she often brings some private goods of magical knowledge. After the professors paid more attention, they also discovered that this is a genius little witch. Professor Flitwick also lamented that she really should have come to Ravenclaw. The Sorting Hat is crazy to send her to Gryffindor. And Professor McGonagall is very proud. Said she was just like her when she was young. Hermione always felt that these changes had something to do with Ian. But her classmates treated her differently. Among the classmates, only Neville could speak, and everyone else seemed to be avoiding her. But no one dared to say excessive words to her, just isolated her. It made her feel bad, so she spent most of her spare time looking for Ian. But Ian often disappears inexplicably, so she can only go to the library alone. This afternoon is the flight class. I heard that the class was opened in advance due to the teaching arrangement. She must get a good grade. I can't believe Harry would do that. Hermione met Ian in the hallway in front of the auditorium, complaining to Ian about the flying lesson during the day. Neville fell from the air because he couldn't control the broom, and he was not seriously injured because he hung on the statue in the middle and was cushioned. But his memory ball fell out and Draco got it. Draco then provoked Harry's rage, and the two flew into the air. Now Harry was taken by Professor McGonagall. Gryffindor doesn't know how many points he will lose. Chapter 50. Ian looked at the hairy little witch in front of him, smiled and said, "Don't worry about that, Gryffindor won't lose any points. Professor McGonagall, she called Oliver Wood from my class that afternoon. Looks like Harry's on the Gryffindor Quidditch team." Professor McGonagall is a big Quidditch fan. Hearing Ian's words, Hermione said incredulously, "Harry, he broke the school rules." Ian looked at Hermione's expression that didn't dare to consult, and laughed loudly. "Hermione, Gryffindor has never been one to play by the rules. If you want to integrate into the academy as soon as possible, I think you need to be bold." Speaking of which, Ian winked like Dumbledore and said, "Besides, as long as you don't get caught, it's not a violation of the rules." Hermione sat down on the seat in the auditorium in a daze. What Ian said just now had too much impact on her. It didn't take long for the news that Harry joined Quidditch to spread, as Ian said. After all, Gryffindor never had any secrets. At this time Draco came over and continued to taunt Harry, and the two made an agreement for a midnight duel. Hermione tried to stop the two, but apparently failed. At this moment Hermione wanted to ask Ian to stop Harry and Ronald. But when she looked up to the teacher's seat, she found that Ian had left. Just like that, Harry and Ronald put on their clothes and went to the trophy room to fight Draco after their roommate fell asleep. When the two went downstairs, the headlights in the lounge were turned on. It was Hermione who sat in front of the two, looked at them angrily, and said, "I can't believe you guys actually did this." Harry and Ronald ignored Hermione and walked directly towards the entrance of the cave. Hermione hastily followed, trying to persuade the two to come back. But after leaving the waiting room, Hermione just wanted to go back, but found that the fat lady in the portrait had disappeared. Hermione could only go with the two of them. When the three of them arrived at the trophy showroom, they found that there was no one there. Some only have Filch waiting for them. Only then did Harry and Ronald realize that Draco had tricked them. The three ran wildly in the corridor in order not to be caught by Filch. Just when the three of them ran to the corner of the corridor, Hermione's eyes lit up when she looked at the familiar room ahead. Ahead is the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Ian will help us. But Harry and Ronald don't think so, they only know that Professor Grindelwald is very serious. Not to mention that Ian is also a dark wizard who controls skeletons. Go to the dark wizard for help at night? They'd much rather go on a night out at Snape's office, at least Snape wouldn't actually kill them. But the two didn't have time to answer Hermione's words, and Filch was about to catch up to them. Hermione ran to the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, pushed open the door and rushed in, while Harry and Ronald continued to run downstairs along the corridor. In the classroom of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, Ian, who was adjusting the teaching aids, was surprised when he saw the little witch coming in from the classroom door. "I was waiting for Grindelwald, why is it Hermione? Why did you come here this late at night?" Hermione didn't have time to think about it when she entered, and immediately closed the door. But looking back, neither Harry nor Ronald were there. They ran. If they are caught, they will be deducted a lot of points. At this time, the door of Ian's classroom was knocked again. Hermione's face turned pale instantly. "Professor Grindelwald. I'm Filch." That's when Hermione noticed Ian, and saw Ian put his finger on his lips. "Hush!" Hermione covered her mouth immediately, but her eyes were full of horror. Ian pulled Hermione behind him, waved his hand and cast a disillusionment charm on Hermione's body, and then went to open the door. When I opened the door, I saw Filch standing at the door, and asked respectfully, "Professor Grindelwald, I found a few little wizards traveling at night. May I ask if a little wizard came into this room just now?" Hermione couldn't help screaming, but she felt that there was something magical about her, and Filch couldn't see her. Just listen to Ian say to Filch, "I don't have anyone here, you can go to other places to have a look, I heard it seems to be running downstairs." Filch didn't dare to question Ian's words, saying, "Okay Professor, then I'll go and have a look." With that, Filch closed the door for Ian. Ian waved his hand again, breaking the disillusionment charm on Hermione. "Tell me, how did Yaya get discovered so late?" Hermione hadn't recovered from her panic at this point. Ian shook his head and said, "Newbie, go get me a glass of milk and remember to add some chocolate." Seconds later, a glass of chocolate milk flew out of Ian's break room. Just floating in front of Ian, Ian took it, handed it to Hermione, and said, "Drink it, it will be better." Hermione took the milk tremblingly, and took a big gulp, only to catch her breath. She looked into Ian's eyes and angrily told Ian what had just happened. After listening, Ian nodded and said with a smile, "There is no problem with this. Basically every student at Hogwarts will violate the school rules. Have you forgotten what I said during the day? Just don't get caught." Hermione said indignantly. "But if you are discovered, you will lose a lot of points." Ian said to Hermione. "Actually, there are many things more important than grades, Hermione. You're smart, think about it, maybe sometimes we need to accept other people's ideas. Only in this way can we be recognized by others and become friends. Like me and you. I didn't know what friendship and family affection were before, until I met Grindelwald and Dumbledore." After pondering for a while, Hermione noticed the point of Ian's words. Hermione hurriedly asked Ian. "Ian, you said until you met Grindelwald and Dumbledore." Ian nodded and said, "Yes, I've been alone until then. So can you tell me your story?" Ian looked into Hermione's serious eyes, nodded after thinking for a while, and told the story of his former self. The moment Ian finished speaking, Hermione cried and hugged Ian, saying, "Sorry. I shouldn't have asked, I didn't know your past was so lonely and painful." Being regarded as the material of the Lich, the uninterrupted war is between killing and being killed every day. Ian patted her on the back and asked seriously, "Do you not mind my identity as an executioner and necromancer? Even so, you still think I'm a friend?" Hermione raised her head and said seriously with tears all over her face, "I don't mind. You're my friend. First friend." After speaking, Hermione realized that the distance between the two is a bit too close. But she doesn't let go, she thinks it's Ian who needs to be comforted now. "Without parents, I live in a cruel world every day." Ian felt her emotions, and Hermione was genuinely grieving for Ian's past. A certain emotion gradually spread in Ian's mind. Chapter 51. Just as Hermione was holding Ian, the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom was pushed open. Grindelwald came in and said, "Ian. You said you needed something." So Grindelwald stared blankly at the scene in front of him. Hermione jumped up from Ian like a frightened rabbit, and hid behind Ian. Hermione saw that it was Professor Roger's face that turned red immediately, but she was also very nervous. She wondered if this professor would pursue her night tour. Grindelwald looked at Ian and Hermione with a strange smile, and said, Hey, Ian, I have no objection to your affairs. But it's still young, you have to grasp it." Ian looked at Grindelwald with a dark face and said, "I'm just friends with Hermione, she's very talented." "Ah, that's right, it's just friends." Hermione felt very disappointed when she heard Ian say they were just friends, and she didn't know why. But hearing Grindelwald's ridicule, her face became even redder. As someone who has experienced it, Grindelwald knew what was going on by seeing the reactions of the two of them. One has never experienced feelings at all, and the other is still in a state of ignorance. It seems that this matter needs to be discussed with Albus. Then Grindelwald looked at Hermione, smiled and said, "Don't be nervous, kid, I'm just here to ask Ian something." Hermione breathed a sigh of relief. It seems that she won't be held accountable for violating school rules. But recalling what Ian said just now, maybe the score is really not that important? Seeing Hermione relax, Grindelwald looked at Ian and asked, "Ian, you said you have something to do with me." Ian nodded and said, "Come on, go to my lounge and say, Hermione, do you want to come with me?" Hermione hesitated for a moment, then nodded, blushing. Now that she couldn't walk back, what if she ran into Filch again? And she was still very curious about what the professor's lounge was like. "Son, don't be too surprised for a while." Grindelwald winked at Hermione. Hermione was very puzzled, what's so surprising about a lounge? Until she walked up to the second floor, Ian pushed open the door of the lounge, and the luxurious light dazzled her eyes. Hermione didn't expect that Professor Ian's room looked very small from the outside, but the space inside was astonishingly large. Hermione stared wide-eyed at the decor and furniture in Ian's room. She had never seen anything more luxurious in a museum in her life. Golden red is the main color of the room, with a very classic carpet and a very large sofa in the middle. There is a very large golden red bed at the back, and there is even a large white jade bath in the innermost part where you can swim. There are still some things cooking on the magic stove on the right. The cursed kitchen utensils are cooking automatically, and the aroma is wafting from the pot. There is also a huge wine cabinet next to the stove, which is full of all kinds of wine. What attracted Hermione most was the large jewel-encrusted bookshelf to the right. Hermione swears it. She had never seen so many books except in the Hogwarts library. It's just that there is a black door next to the bookshelf, and she doesn't know what's inside. Grindelwald laughed at the shocked Hermione, and said, "Boy, I was also shocked by Ian when I first came here. How? I can guarantee that there is no more luxurious lounge in Hogwarts than here." After finishing speaking, Grindelwald went directly to Ian's wine cabinet and began to choose wine. Ian patted Hermione on the shoulder and asked, "It's not bad, right?" Hermione, who recovered, grabbed Ian's clothes and said excitedly, "Ian! Why didn't you tell me?" Seeing Hermione's excited look, Ian spread his hands and said, "You never asked me." "That's because I thought the professor's dormitory wouldn't be much better than ours." Hermione glared at Ian, then pointed to the bookshelf and asked, Ian, can I read the books there? Looking at the expectant Hermione, Ian nodded with a smile and said. Okay, but don't read black magic books, your wool is too weak now. Hermione pursed her lips, she knew that Ian was doing it for her own good, so she nodded happily. At this time, Grindelwald's voice came. Ian! What are you doing today? It smells so good. Ian looked at the greedy Grindelwald with a smile, and said. It contains fried lobster and some fried fish pieces. Today's appetizer. How about it? The spices I sent are not very fragrant. Grindelwald nodded quickly. Hermione's attention was also attracted by the scent, and Ian knew she was hungry when he heard her swallowing. Ian smiled and said to the two. Let's eat first. Ian waved his hand, and the cooked food was automatically loaded and flew towards the table in front of the sofa. The golden and crispy breadcrumb skin of the fish nuggets is decorated with a few slices of green parsley, and the rich cheese is wrapped in the fish. The big lobster has also turned into pieces, the red spices are sprinkled all over the shrimp meat, and the golden milk-flavored French fries are spread on the side to make this dish even more appetizing. Grindelwald and Hermione both swallowed, and Grindelwald sighed. Sure enough. It's the right choice to come to your place for supper at night. After finishing speaking, Grindelwald waved 2 wine glasses, poured the wine he just took from the wine cabinet into the glasses, and handed Ian a glass. As soon as Ian took it, Hermione glared over and said. Ian, drinking is not good. Ian saw Hermione, who looked like a lion cub, smiled and said. It's okay, you will know when your magic power is strong. Ha ha ha, Ian is right, you have to listen to Ian, kid. Grindelwald chimed in. Seeing that neither Ian nor Grindelwald was listening, Hermione snorted and turned her head away. Ian smiled and waved, and a glass of chocolate milk flew towards Hermione. Hermione took the milk arrogantly and just took a sip. At this time, the door of the living room opened again. Hermione froze when she saw the person at the door, it was Headmaster Dumbledore. Dumbledore said with a smile. I knew Guy. Jack, you and Ian are having supper again. Then Dumbledore looked at Hermione, smiled even wider, and continued. It seems that we have a new friend today. After Dumbledore finished speaking, he went straight to Grindelwald and sat down next to him. Give me a drink too, and a pair of gloves, please. Chapter 52. Hermione looked at Dumbledore, who was sitting down, and felt even more anxious. Dumbledore looked at the anxious little witch in front of him, and took the glass from Grindelwald. Dumbledore raised his glass to Hermione and said with a smile. Boy, it's just a party today, let's relax. Ian's food is better than the food in the auditorium. Hermione relaxed a little, glanced at Ian beside her, and said timidly. Professor, you. Dumbledore had already seen what Hermione was thinking, and interrupted her with a smile. Gryffindor is adventurous. Who can embarrass a brave man who ventures through the night? Ian continued. Hermione, a Gryffindor who doesn't violate the school rules is not a qualified Gryffindor. After listening, Dumbledore nodded to Ian with a smile. 353. Hermione was completely taken aback by Dumbledore's and Ian's attitude. Professor Dumbledore's words and Ian's words have exactly the same meaning. Next, Hermione, who was suspicious, didn't talk about her night tour. Hermione relaxed a bit, but was still a little stiff. After all, there are professors here, as well as the principal. At this moment, Ian looked at Grindelwald and Dumbledore and said. I want to put a team of saints in Norway and set up a dragon farm. Grindelwald took a sip of his wine, looked at Ian, and said. There's nothing wrong with that, but why are you in Norway? If you want the flesh and blood of a fire dragon, there are black dragons from the Hebrides in the mainland. Hermione was a little confused listening to the conversation between the two. What is a saint? What is a dragon farm? Can fire dragons be raised? Ian scratched his head and continued. The Norwegian ridgeback sent by Hallmen Dug a few days ago is very delicious. Grindelwald, Dumbledore, and Hermione were all stunned. Just listen to Ian go on to say. Norwegian ridgeback tenderloin, delicious. And flesh and soul are also useful, just treat it as a pigsty. Dumbledore looked at the enthusiastic Ian, and said helplessly. Ian, you mean to go over there and set up a dragon farm just to raise food? The three saw that Ian nodded and replied. There is also the storage of soul and flesh and blood. Who believes you? Grindelwald also said helplessly. Then who do you want to let go? Ian thought for a while, looked at Grindelwald, and said. Let Andy Blake go, and the farm can be handed over to Moss. Dumbledore and Grindelwald nodded after listening. Anyway, Ian is rich, let him do whatever he wants. Hermione was at a loss, but she understood one thing. Ian wants to raise a dragon. Hermione nudged Ian with her elbow, seeing Ian looking at her, she asked. Ian, are you going to raise a dragon? Hearing Hermione's question, Ian nodded. Hermione looked at Ian worriedly and said. Fire dragon, I saw the introduction in the book, it is said to be very dangerous. Ian stroked Hermione's hair and said with a smile. I'm asking someone to help me raise it. I won't be in danger. Hearing Ian's answer, Hermione's curiosity was also piqued, and she continued to ask. Then can I go and see the dragon then? I haven't seen a real dragon yet. Ian didn't reply yet, only Dumbledore said with a smile. Of course, I don't think Ian will refuse a simple request from a friend. Ian always felt that Dumbledore was planning something, but nodded anyway. Okay, I'll let you know when the time comes. Hearing Ian's promise, Hermione felt very much looking forward to it. Dumbledore and Grindelwald looked at the two with knowing smiles. Then Grindelwald handed Hermione a lobster claw. This surprised Hermione, she felt that the professors at Hogwarts were like her parents. Before Hermione had time to thank Grindelwald, there was a knock on the door of the lounge. Please come in. Ian was a little puzzled, who would come back so late? I saw McGonagall opened the door and walked in, saw the three of Ian, and a figure she didn't expect. Professor Dumbledore. I heard the portrait say that you are here with Ian, and two little wizards were caught on a night tour tonight. I need to teach you to deal with it. Then McGonagall turned to look seriously at the frightened Hermione, and asked. Miss Granger, why are you here? Hermione turned pale the moment she saw it was Professor McGonagall. When Hermione heard McGonagall's question and was about to explain, she only heard Dumbledore say with a smile. It was me and Ian who made her stay, after all Miss Granger has worked so hard to learn. Ian looked at McGonagall, nodded and said. It's too late to leave Hermione for dinner after all. After speaking, Ian tugged on Hermione's clothes, and at the same time used magic sound transmission to Hermione and said. Professor McGonagall must have known that you went on night tours with them. Professor McGonagall won't pursue it if we don't tell it now. Professor McGonagall is a Gryffindor, after all. As long as you don't get caught, you haven't violated the school rules. Grindel on the side also nodded with a smile. Seeing this, McGonagall smiled and said. Granger, I'll call you Hermione here, since that's the case, remember to go back to the lounge after dinner. After speaking, Professor McGonagall moved away from the figure blocking the door, and Harry and Ronald at the door were staring at the scene in Ian's lounge with dumbfounded eyes. Incomparably luxurious. Ronald couldn't imagine how many galleons were needed for even one piece of furniture. What shocked them the most was seeing Granger next to Ian. At this moment, Hermione is holding the lobster's claws, and there is a cup of hot milk in front of her. It is obviously in stark contrast with the two unlucky ones at 1.9. After they separated from Hermione, they ran all the way to the 4th floor and ran into Peeves. Peeves and the noise they made woke up at least half the castle. Then they were caught on the spot by Filch, who was chasing them in the restricted area on the 4th floor. The reason was that the two failed to open the door in the corridor on the 4th floor. Just like that, Filch brought Harry and Ronald before McGonagall. McGonagall told the story of the future to those present. With the exception of Hermione, who was fidgeting, Ian and Grindelwald looked at Dumbledore playfully. At this moment, Ian teased Dumbledore and said with a smile. Let me tell you, your door can only block the humanoid monster. Dumbledore's face darkened when he heard Ian's words. Chapter 53. In the end the matter ended with Dumbledore speaking. Dumbledore put Harry and Ronald in confinement for a fortnight, arranged by McGonagall. Since it was the first time, Dumbledore did not deduct points. But this punishment is not the punishment of night travel, but the punishment of forgetting to unlock the lock. Dumbledore and the others can't wait for little wizards to go on adventures in the levels they set up. Now that Voldemort has become a beating worker, Harry and the others will naturally have no problem with their safety. And after seeing Hermione, Harry and Ronald naturally felt unbalanced. Why should we be locked up? and you have special treatment." Ian, who sensed the emotions of the two, waved his hands behind his back, and cast a curse so that the two of them could not talk about it at any time, and could only make a woo-woo-woo sound when they wanted to say it. This curse is a prank magic taught to Ian by the saints, but it cannot be lifted by the little wizard. Naturally, the magic fluctuations of Ian's spellcasting could not deceive the professors. Professor McGonagall gave Ian an approving wink. She didn't want Gryffindor to be ashamed. Dumbledore and Grindelwald gave inexplicable smiles, which gave Ian goosebumps. Only Hermione was struggling, and she had just worked up the courage to tell McGonagall what had happened. Before she could open her mouth, McGonagall smiled and said to her, "Hermione, I'll send the two of them back first, and I'll come back later." Then McGonagall knelt down and stroked Hermione's hair, whispering, "I know about your situation, the punishment for them is the punishment of forgetting to unlock the lock. We're Gryffindor, if we haven't been found out, then we haven't violated the school rules. Hermione, don't tell any other little wizards this." Hermione was flabbergasted. Was that from that stern Professor McGonagall? She's been rocked so many times tonight. Ian sent Andy the next day to set up a dragon farm in Norway with the key to the Gringotts vault in Norway. The head of the dark creature farm is now Moth Roger. Ian, McGonagall and Dumbledore changed Hermione a lot. Hermione began to gradually change her personality now, and began to slowly accept other people's shortcomings. This allowed her to gain a little friendship with her roommate. At night, Hermione will appear in Ian's lounge from time to time, and this place is much more comfortable than the environment in the library. And there are so many delicious things. Every day, Ian and Dumbledore have different suppers, and there are some magical dishes made of magic ingredients. Really delicious. And the professors also take good care of her, and they will answer her questions when she has supper at night. Professor McGonagall escorted her back to the common room every night. It's called a legal night out. The treatment of Harry and Ronald was not so bad. Their confinement was arranged by McGonagall under Snape's hand, to make them remember. These days, Harry and Ronald are in pain. Harry received a letter from Hagrid on the weekend, inviting him to be a guest, but he never had time to go to Hagrid because of the confinement. Snape had borrowed a few ghosts from Ian to keep an eye on Harry and Ronald. This makes it impossible for them to even secretly goof off while living with fear. And the endlessly disgusting potion ingredients waiting for them to deal with. In addition, Snape's venom is sprayed from time to time, spurring them on. And whenever Harry and Ronald tried to denounce Hermione, they couldn't speak anymore. Gryffindor's senior students also looked at the two of them bitterly. Ronald also gets laughed at by George and Fred. The professors also avoid talking about it. During the charms class, Professor Flitwick didn't give them two good looks again. Can you forget the lockpicking spell in Chapter 7 of Standard Spells? In order for the little wizards to break through the level, Flitwick, taught this spell in advance in the first class. In this way, it wasn't until the end of the second week of confinement that Harry and Ronald were able to breathe a sigh of relief. At this time McGonagall found Harry and Ronald and told them seriously. As a wizard, always remember your magic. Your wand is not a club for beating. I hope you can learn from this lesson. Harry and Ronald didn't quite understand why Professor McGonagall was telling them this. But Harry had a vague guess in his heart, this confinement should be related to casting spells. Ian receives letters from Andy Brock, the manager of the Norwegian dragon farm, every day. During the few days when Andy was working in Norway, he found that the people in the YWAY Ministry of Magic had a strange attitude towards them. Although it is welcome on the surface, people from the Norwegian Ministry of Magic seem to be planning something deeper. Ian didn't have any special plan to let the Saints go to Norway to build a dragon farm this time, so Andy didn't bring the dead with him. Maybe the Norwegian Ministry of Magic thought they were dark wizards when they saw the undead, even though they were. The Minister of Magic of Norway, Meyer Nielsen, was plotting something in the minister's office at this time. A few days ago, he received several wizards from England who came to open a dragon farm. Meyer Nielsen is also the Minister of Magic who just came to power, so he is naturally very happy to receive such a very beneficial performance suddenly. But he still kept an eye out, because his resume does not allow him to make mistakes in the position of Minister of Magic. So he sent people to England to investigate the details of these people. But according to his investigation, the wizard named Andy Blake has been missing for decades. Andy Brack was a saint in his youth. So Meyer Nelson had an idea. Who doesn't know that Grindelwald is dead, and now there is only one descendant left? And this descendant of the Grindelwald family is just a chess piece introduced by Dumbledore. So whether this Andy Blake is true or not, just grabbing Andy Brack and handing it to the International Federation of Wizards will bring him a lot of prestige. At the same time, the inheritance of these remaining saints, an entire dragon farm and a large sum of galleons can also be legally collected. Meyer Nelson looked at the president of the Norwegian branch of the International Federation of Wizards and the director of the Norwegian Auror Office, Truru, and said, "President Yulzen, it seems that we have received a gift from Merlin this time. Of course. The most important thing is to ask Director Truru to release the first magic." Yulzen and Norway Atrullo looked at Meyer with a smile, and said, "Of course. Regards. Merlin. Regard Mylan." Chapter 54. At night, Meyer, Truru, and Yulzen led people to attack the Saints' camp. At the request of Minister Meyer, all the Norwegian Aurors were dispatched, and they captured Andy Brock and some of the Saints with the help of confusing potions and sneak attacks. Andy and the Saints are held in the courtroom of the Ministry of Magic. At this time, Meyer Nelson and Truru were torturing Andy Brock in the courtroom. "You are so tenacious, you have survived both the Veritaserum potion and the Cruciatus curse. Tell me where the rest of you are, and I'll stop torturing you." Trullo slowly put away his wand and said in his mouth. He had already used no less than 2 Cruciatus curse just now, but he didn't expect that Andy, who is already very old, is still a tough guy. The other saints have been tied up at this time, and their mouths have been cursed, and they are guarded by Aurors. The saints looked at the 2 who were torturing Andy. If eyes could kill, Minister Meyer and Truru would have died countless times. Andy took a mouthful of blood, looked at Meyer and Truru with red eyes, and said ferociously, "If you kill me, I won't tell where they are, give up." The angry Trullo is going to cast the Cruciatus curse on Andy again, so that he can experience the taste of this curse. But Trullo was stopped by Meyer and said, "Stop using this spell, you've tortured him to death and will never know where the vault key is. It is very likely that Grindelwald left in the treasury in Norway, and I don't know how many good things there are. By the way, I've heard of you, Andy Brack. Brack, you are already old, and it is said that you would not be cursed so easily when you were young. But there are so many black magic items on you, 20 people against more than 200 Aurors. 3 or 4 Aurors from our Ministry of Magic have died, and you are only seriously injured. Should I be called a follower of Grindelwald?" Andy stared at Minister Meyer and said, "If you don't kill me now, I will definitely turn you into a PSY when I get out." Minister Meyer's eyes instantly turned cold, and he said, "Brack, you can't get out. You will die, in an international court. I think a Dementor's kiss would suit you better." But Andy laughed loudly, glanced at the 2 of them, and said, "Don't worry, your fate will not be any better than mine, Sir will avenge me." Meyer looked at Andy playfully and said, "Oh? I remember that your master Grindelwald is dead. And died tragically in Nurmengard prison. Now there is only one descendant left in Grindelwald's family. Do you still expect him to avenge you? When you go to the International Wizarding Tribunal, I'm afraid he will not be able to protect himself." Andy looked at Secretary Meyer sneeringly, and said, "You think Sir is a little wizard? Wait. Your end will be worse than mine. You can't even die in peace." Meyer looked at the crazy Andy, his eyes became cold, he turned his head and said to Truru, "Interrogate him as you like, let him tell the location of the vault key, but don't kill him." Ian was having supper with the Dumbledores at the moment. Dumbledore and Grindelwald looked at today's supper: butter-baked Norwegian ridgeback tenderloin, spicy fried tenderloin and grilled tenderloin, and swallowed their saliva. McGonagall looked at Ian while eating his supper and exclaimed, "I never knew dragon meat could be so delicious." Hermione puffed her cheeks and nodded quickly. It was so delicious that she couldn't stop it. Green Grindelwald looked at Ian at this time, smiled and said, "Ian, I suspect that you asked Andy to set up this farm just because you knew the rarity of the Norwegian ridgeback. It's not good for such a delicious creature to be eaten." Ian raised his glass and took a sip, nodded and said, "And their fangs are very suitable for making some dangerous potions." Hearing Ian's words, Dumbledore nodded with a smile. "I've given it to Severus to study. He also asked if I had any other Norwegian ridgeback material. Of course. I can only say no, I don't want him to know that the meat was eaten by us. Just when Grindelwald was about to continue to say something, Newbie appeared in front of everyone. Nubby held a letter in his hand, saluted Ian, and said, "Master. An owl just dropped this letter at the door." Newbie brought it to Master. Looking at the letter in Nubby's hand, Ian smiled and took it. Grindelwald also looked at the letter and said with a smile, "Ian, it seems that you have adapted to the job of a leader." Ian ignored Grindelwald, opened the envelope and read it. As Ian read the letter, his frown deepened. The professors felt the magic in Ian start to boil. They all looked at Ian seriously. Seeing that the professors were all looking at Ian, Hermione, who was already beside him, stuck her little head over worriedly and curiously. But the words war, injury, and support caught my eye on the letter. Hermione's face suddenly turned pale. Grindelwald hurriedly asked, "Ian, what did the letter say?" With a gloomy face, Ian handed the letter to Grindelwald and said, "The Norwegian Ministry of Magic launched a war against our people, Andy, and they were captured. Jess Anker, who escaped, wrote me this letter." After Grindelwald took the letter, he saw that it said, "Sir, the Norwegian Ministry of Magic declared us the remnants of the saints and waged war on us. Scumbag Meyer Nelson leads people to put a curse on our people in the good time of night. Mr. Andy Brock and others are now arrested by the Norwegian Ministry of Magic in order to cover us. Most of the people we escaped were also injured. Sir, please send someone to help." Grindelwald read the letter. Dumbledore's face darkened after hearing this, and said, "Ian, I'm going. After all, I'm the president of the International Federation of Wizards and the head wizard of the Wisengarda. Meyer Nelson dare not oppose me. I will let him let Andy go." Ian looked at Dumbledore, and the black mist on Ian's body was gradually pouring out of his claws. He controlled his anger and prevented the black mist from reaching everyone in the room. A voice from hell came from Ian's mouth. "They're coming after me. I'll go get them myself. Since they want war, then I will give them war." Chapter 55. It was finally decided that Dumbledore and Grindelwald would accompany Ian on the trip. McGonagall stayed behind to look after Hermione and handle Hogwarts work. "Ian, don't involve Muggles, now we need to gather strength." Ian looked very calm, looked at Dumbledore and said, "Dumbledore, I know, the Norwegian Ministry of Magic won't stop me this time, will you?" Dumbledore shook his head with complicated eyes, and said, "For the greater good." Grindelwald patted Dumbledore on the shoulder. "That's what you look like, Albus. The young you are the real you. For the greater good." Then Dumbledore recruited Fawkes, and the flame of the Phoenix brought the three of them to the Bialoiza forest outside the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. The remaining saints were waiting for Ian's support here, and when they saw the Phoenix flame, they thought it was Dumbledore coming. But when they saw Ian and Grindelwald step out of the flames, they immediately relaxed. The most powerful god in the hearts of the saints has come. Looking at the wounded saints, Ian frowned. Ian directly took out a soul, crushed it and transformed it into life energy Emperor Z by saints. The wounds on the saints are healing visibly. Even wounds caused by black magic are stabilized. Dumbledore and Grindelwald are shocked every time they see Ian's magic. Extend life, heal wounds, and restore magic power. Unfortunately, only Ian can use this spell. Grindelwald also asked Ian at that time, and Ian said that he needed to be proficient in death magic to the extreme. Grindelwald is now also learning death magic. As he became more and more familiar with death magic, he felt that this magic was definitely not as simple as Ian said. Ian looked at the saints who got better, and said two words coldly. "Lead the way." But the simple two words made the saints cheer. "Andy Brack, they're saved. Sir won't give up on us. This time I can finally see the powerful strength of Mr." Not long after, Ian looked at the building hidden deep underground in front of him, and asked without any emotion. "Is this here?" "Yes, sir. This is the entrance to the Norwegian Ministry of Magic." Jess Anker, who led Ian the way, replied excitedly. Ian nodded, looked back at the crowd, and quietly said a word. "Do you know why my title is Natural Disaster?" As soon as Ian's voice fell, everyone only felt the surrounding temperature drop suddenly. Countless black space cracks appeared around, and spirits crawled out one by one. Another skeletal dragon has already flown into the air, hovering over Ian's head. In a few seconds, all the plants in and around Bialoiza forest withered. Just by summoning the undead, this place has already become the land of the dead. Then, a huge corpse stretched out its hand from the crack in the space, and when he climbed up, everyone found that this huge corpse was bigger than a bone dragon. The giant undead voluntarily got down on the ground, picked up everyone and placed them on their heads with their hands. Even knowing that it is Ian's undead, everyone's faces are still pale. Dumbledore and Grindelwald became serious when they saw this terrifying scene. But he quickly waved his wand and cast the muggle-repelling curse. With the full efforts of the two of them, this range is ridiculously large. Still, it's good that the Bobby Muggles saw Ian's ghost. Dumbledore thought that the withering of the forest must be hidden, and he could only let the Muggles make up their own minds. The Muggle Prime Minister also needs to send someone to say hello, otherwise things will be difficult to explain. Then Ian turned around and said, "Because I am the walking scourge. Secretary Meyer has returned to his ministerial office. He's already at the post-Andy Blake trial. He'll get a lot of galleons. And a dragon farm for the Ministry of Magic. And that huge fame, CFFE, at the International Confederation of Wizards. Hero Meyer Nelson." But when he was still fantasizing, he suddenly felt that the surrounding temperature dropped rapidly to freezing point. "President Yulson!" Meyer shouted out the door. Meyer could see that he was breathing white air when he spoke. "Minister." Yulson hurried into Meyer's office. "President Yulson, what happened outside?" Suddenly the temperature dropped to this level. Yulson was also shivering from the cold, and was about to speak. Boom! A loud explosion resounded throughout the Ministry of Magic. The ground was shaken and trembled, and some places that had been in disrepair for a long time collapsed directly. Both Meyer and Yulson nearly fell to the ground. The two heard the noise just now as if it came from the upper floor. At this time, the Aurors of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic on the first floor and the staff on night shift were knocked down to the ground by the impact of the huge explosion. If they weren't wizards with relatively strong physiques, they would definitely have been seriously injured by now. Berg is an elite Auror of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. After completing the task of arresting the Saints today, he was assigned to guard on the first floor to prevent the Saints from reinforcements. When the huge explosion just now gave him a splitting headache, he had never felt such a powerful wave of magic. Barely supporting his body with his hands, he looked into the smoke of the explosion. "I saw many strange figures appearing in the smoke." Suppressing the physical pain, Berg thought suspiciously. "The support of the Saints. Why did you come so soon?" But when the smoke dissipated, fear instantly boiled in his heart. "I saw that it was a moving skeleton and corpse. The entire entrance of the Ministry of Magic that was blown up. You can see that there are still undead all over the mountains and plains outside. The undead hold all kinds of weapons in their hands, and the eyes of each undead are burning with purple flames. Caw caw caw." The footsteps of the undead hit the hearts of everyone in the Ministry of Magic like the death bell. "Merlin! What is that? The corpse is alive! The corpse is alive! They are coming for revenge! Don't panic! Quick! Attack them!" An Auror just raised his wand, but among the undead there are skeletal mages who can cast spells faster than him. A black spell flew out from the tip of the skeleton mage's wand, hitting the Auror who raised the spell directly. "Ah!" Then, a heart-piercing scream spread throughout the hall of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. Chapter 56. I saw white maggots gushing out from the body of the wizard who was hit, frantically eating his flesh and blood. Blood spewed out wildly. In a short while, the maggots had been gnawed until only the vital organs and the head remained. "Help me!" The moment he finished speaking, countless maggots gushed out from his facial features and internal organs. "Die instantly!" The people around him who saw this scene immediately vomited. "Crazy back! What wicked magic is this?" But there were also one or two unlucky ones who got too close to that Auror and got maggots crawling on them. Ah! The hellish way of death just now happened again. Then, the mages among the undead cast spells on the corpse that had been gnawed down to the skeleton. Everyone in the Ministry of Magic, who had been terrified to the extreme, only saw the skeleton of their colleague who had just died standing up again. After picking up his own wand, his eyes lit up with the same soul fire as the undead. This scene directly caused the people on this floor to panic to the point of mental breakdown. "Merlin is here! Someone help me! What the hell are those skeletons? I'm going home. Ah! Now the gate has been blocked by countless undead. The anti-apparition magic in the Norwegian Ministry of Magic has no escape for them. Some wizards scrambled and ran to the lower level. There are also some wizards who dare not move where they are, praying to Merlin to bless them. And a few wizards who were frightened mad rushed towards the undead army, but they ended up becoming a member of the undead. Just when the mental stress of the people in the Norwegian Ministry of Magic reached its limit, they saw a huge mummified head appearing from the opened door. This scene scared the people who stayed in the hall on the first floor to death. Many wizards finally fainted in fear. Ian and the saints sat on the head of the undead titan, looking at the chaotic crowd below. The saints tried their best to swallow their saliva. If they hadn't seen Ian's magic experiment in the breeding farm, they would have vomited like the people who vomited below. Grindelwald watched the skeleton mage's magic with interest. Dumbledore frowned, his perennial habits made him uncomfortable with cruel scenes. But thought it was for the greater good, and this time the Norwegian Ministry of Magic was actually targeting Ian. Dumbledore finally hardened himself. Ian still looked indifferently at the crowd below. Afterwards, Ian pulled out Ian's heart and held it against his cheek, with a loud voice. "You guys, do you know where my friends are?" As Ian spoke, all the undead surrounding the Norsemen knelt down and saluted Ian. This stunned the people who were still alive below. Are these demons controlled by someone? Only then did the people of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic see Ian standing on the head of the undead titan. Behind him is the remnant of saints who fled today. Berg, who was trembling from the temperature and fear below, resisted the fear and asked. "Are you, a descendant of the Grindelwald family?" Ian ignored his thoughts, and said directly in a cold tone. "I only count to 3, answer me." Berg shouted anxiously to Ian. "Wait, I think we can sit down and talk." Ian glanced at him and continued. 3. Kill them all. Hearing Ian's order, the undead stood up, the death of souls in their eyes beating wildly. The undead screamed and raised their weapons to charge the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. "Dark Lord! He's the Dark Lord! The Ministry of Magic is gone!" The undead are like wolves in the flock, and the wizards of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic have already been scared out of their wits. Now he was killed by the undead and then transformed into an undead, and then picked up the wand and killed his former colleagues. Looking at the colleagues who were massacred, Berg's eyes were broken. Now he dare not delay any longer. At the end of the sentence, Ian yelled frantically. "Stop! They're in the courtroom! Stop! Stop!" Ian glanced at him, but didn't give the order to stop. Then Berg saw Dumbledore. Cried out heart-piercingly. "Dumbledore! Stop him! Aren't you the patron saint of the magic world? Why are you standing with this demon?" Dumbledore shook his head and murmured. "It's all for the greater good." Seeing that Dumbledore shook his head, Berg seemed to have been drained of strength, and asked Ian bitterly. "Why are you still killing them? I've told you where the saints are. This person is not crazy yet, he has good talent, he can make a lich with some magic materials." Ian gave him a cold look and said. "The moment they hit my friend, that's when they're dead." At this time, the saint on the head of the undead titan heard Ian's words, and was immediately moved to tears. "I swear in my heart that I will be loyal to Ian in this life. Shed the last drop of blood for the Grindelwald family." Berg smiled bitterly, they had no strength to resist Ian. But Berg then pointed his wand at Ian with a grim expression. But before he released the spell, a wraith appeared behind Berg. Puff! Berg lowered his head and saw a bloody hand protruding from his chest. It's his heart that's in his hand. In a state of panic and disbelief, Berg's heart was crushed by the wraith. After Ian saw that the wraith had killed Berg, he took Berg's body into the space ring. Now the two liches lost at death god can make up for it a little bit. Not long after, the wizard in the hall of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic has been killed by the undead. All wizards at the Norwegian Ministry of Magic have been turned into undead. At this time, Grindelwald on the head of the Titan undead asked Ian. "Ian! Shall we rush down and save Andes now?" Ian sensed the soul fluctuation behind the inner door of the hall, and replied to Grindelwald lightly. "No, they're already here." After hearing the explosion, Minister Meyer and Yulson immediately summoned their staff and led them to the hall on the first floor. He took everyone except Trullo and the 10 elite Aurors who stayed underground to guard Andy Blake and others. But Minister Meyer and Yulson always had a very bad feeling in their hearts. The feeling of heart palpitations and the changes in the environment of the Ministry of Magic made them feel very uneasy. President Yulson, I always feel that something big will happen. Yulson's face was stiff from the cold, and Mian soon replied. Minister Meyer, although I also feel this way, I don't think it will be a big deal. After all, no one dares to attack the Ministry of Magic. The saints are not the saints they were back then. Now they are just a bunch of remnants. Meyer nodded after listening, comforted himself in his heart, and said. That's right. No fool would dare attack the Ministry of Magic. But when the two reached the third floor, they heard the screams gradually coming from upstairs. They have never heard such a miserable scream. This made Minister Meyer and Yulson's scalp tingle, and they looked at each other in disbelief. Minister Meyer roared heartbreakingly. Quick! Speed me up! Someone is attacking the Ministry of Magic 5. Chapter 57. When Minister Meyer and others came to the inner door of the hall, the screams in the hall had all stopped. It was as quiet as a no-man's land behind the door. On the way they encountered some Ministry of Magic staff who had escaped and were frightened mad. Their eyes were broken, and they only chanted words like dead. They are all dead. No matter how much they called them, they still squatted on the ground and talked to themselves as if they couldn't hear them. Once they touch them, they will jump like haze. All these things made Minister Meyer and Yulson feel more uneasy. They felt as if there were demons waiting for them behind the door. The wizard army they assembled is also more and more frightened at this time. The screams just now were too miserable. Now it's as quiet as a cemetery at night. Coupled with the drastic changes in the environment in the Norwegian Ministry of Magic, including the plants inside, it is July 43. Meyer's trembling hand slowly touched the handle of the door. President Yulson. I. Suppressing his uneasiness, Yulson reluctantly said. Minister. Open the door. Trust my judgment. Minister Meyer nodded reluctantly, and pressed down the handle of the gate little by little. The door was slowly pushed open, and everyone in the Norwegian Ministry of Magic saw countless skeletons and corpses looking towards them. The hollow eyes of those skeletons and corpses still burn with fire. The environment in the hall is no longer what they are familiar with. The blood all over the ground was frozen into ice, and the hall has turned bloody at this time. Especially with a gigantic head sticking out of the destroyed entrance. Minister Meyer and others felt like their hearts were about to stop beating. Especially when Minister Meyer and Alison see a mutilated live corpse. He recognized it. It was one of his Aurors. At this time, this Auror, like those undead, only had burning flames in his eyes. Keep an eye on Minister Meyer and everyone. Merlin's magic. Stell. That's Stell. How did he become like this? Is this the arrival of the god of death? Yulson trembled all over, and said to Minister Meyer beside him in fear. Minister, is it Reaper? Before Minister Meyer could speak, he heard an indifferent voice say. Maggots. Welcome to hell. Minister Meyer and the others only saw a little silver-haired wizard standing on top of the giant. As soon as Ian's words fell, the undead raised their weapons and roared. Then he rushed towards the Norwegian Ministry of Magic who had just come up. At this time, as the reporter of the Daily Prophet, Rita Skeeter, she came to Norway. Rita Skeeter received a message from the Minister of Magic of Norway, Meyer Nielsen. Says there's big news for her. There's a message from the saints and it's about the descendants of the Grindelwalds. Rita Skeeter thought about it and understood that Meyer wanted to put pressure on the Grindelwald family by giving her news. Force the Grindelwald family to compromise with the Norwegian Ministry of Magic, and then eat the Grindelwald family step by step. Even so, she has no reason to refuse such a win-win situation. Rita Skeeter found a way through the night and came to Norway with a portkaya, and now she is on her way to the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. Rita Skeeter wears a reflective green dress, jeweled glasses, rings on fat fingers and an alligator bag. Rita Skeeter was on the road, murmuring happily to herself. Meyer, a greedy goblin, how could he have news about the Grindelwald family and the saints? But the Grindelwald family gave the steal to the greedy Meyer. Then I'll accept the news unceremoniously this time. He. When Rita was about to step over the last hill, she frowned and said doubtfully. Why is the temperature so low along the way? And the surrounding plants are dead. Feel like black magic. A feeling of uneasiness appeared in Rita's heart, but her years of awareness made her feel that this might be big news. Immediately, Rita took out the magic camera from the crocodile leather bag, took a photo of the surrounding environment, and then walked towards the top of the mountain. Flip over and you'll be within the scope of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. When Rita got to the top of the mountain, what she saw made her heart stop. The undead all over the mountains and plains have surrounded the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. This number is at least 100,000. A flaming dragon hovers in the black sky. There is also a huge undead lying on its stomach and sticking its head into the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. Seeing this scene, Rita was so frightened that her legs went limp and she sat on the ground. But then she was so excited. Forcibly suppressing the fear in her heart, Rita tremblingly picked up the camera and took a picture of this horrific scene. Norway, the Ministry of Magic, is destroyed. Did the god of death come to the world? In the Norwegian Ministry of Magic, every corner is already filled with undead. In the courtroom, the terrified ex-minister Meyer, Julesen, and Truru were kneeling in front of Ian, guarded by the undead. When Meyer and Ullerson saw Dumbledore, they thought that Dumbledore was coming to save them, but in the end they found out in despair that Dumbledore was with the devil. Everyone is dead. And when Ian attacked the courtroom, Trullo thought it was Meyer who came back, but it turned out to be Ian's undead. Before they could react, the Aurors were all killed, and finally turned into undead in front of them. After the left-behind Aurors were killed by none left and turned into undead, the Norwegian Ministry of Magic has since become history. Grindelwald is examining the injuries of the tortured saints. Dumbledore looked at Meyer, Julesen, and Truru in front of him, and asked Ian with a complicated expression. Ian, what about these three people? From Dumbledore's journey, he felt that Ian's cruelty far exceeded his imagination. But he didn't dare to stop Ian at this time. This is the first time Ian started a war in this world. It's also the first time Ian has waged a war to protect his friends in 1.8. If he stops Ian, he will definitely fight Ian. And this time Grindelwald will definitely not be on his side. His relationship with Ian will definitely drop to freezing point too. If Ian leaves Hogwarts, they can't afford it. The prophecy of the destruction of the world may indeed be born. And for Dumbledore, Ian has been in contact with Ian for so long, and Ian is always thinking of them, they are already family members. He and Grindelwald regard Ian as their friend and at the same time regard Ian as their child. Reasonably speaking, he has no reason to stop Ian from destroying the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. And he knew that if he and Grindelwald and the people at Hogwarts were hurt, Ian's methods could be even more brutal. Chapter 58. Meyer, Ullerson, and Trullo had heard Dumbledore's words and thought that Dumbledore would intercede for them. But what Ian said next scared the three of them out of their wits. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Ian exuded the mist of black magic and said, I want to take out the souls of the three of them, make them into soul lamps, and burn them until they completely dissipate. The fear of the three exploded completely at this moment. The kneeling trio frantically pleaded with Dumbledore. President Dumbledore! You have to save us. Please, save us. We dare not again. Dumbledore just shook his head and walked towards Grindelwald. Before the three of them could speak again, the black magic aura emanating from Ian's body overwhelmed the three of them. In the black mist came the violent screams of three people. Ah! Don't! Let me go! I'm the Minister of Magic! Ah! Demon! You are a demon! Ah! But after a while, the screams in the black mist stopped. The black mist was taken back by Ian, only to see that the black mist dissipated, and Ian had 3 more bone lamps with green lights on his hands. The lamps are held together by a chain of bones, and each has a human face in the middle. 25 It is Meyer, Julesen, and Truro. They are ignited in the soul, and a green flame burns in the soul. The 3 screamed and screamed in the soul lamp, but no sound came out. After doing this, Ian walked towards Grindelwald, and Ian came to Andy Blake's side. At this time, Andy still didn't have a piece of good meat on his body. Andy, who was dying, looked at Ian, with tears in his eyes, choked up and said, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't complete your task. And I screwed up. I left kids hurt. Ian shook his head and said, You have worked hard. After speaking, Ian sat down beside Andy, using magic to feel Andy's wound. 7 Cruciatus Curses. More than a dozen torture curses. And some traces of black magic. Andy watched Ian sit next to him, grabbed Ian's hand, and continued. Sir, Andy is not working hard. Thank you sir for avenging me. I don't want to go to death. If you can, please let my body become your undead. I can continue to follow Mr. After speaking, Andy looked at the young saints around him, and said loudly. You must follow Mr. Never disappoint Mr. S expectations. At this moment, Ian frowned, interrupted Andy, and said directly. Don't talk now. If you have anything to say, wait for you to recover later. I have enough undead. I don't need one of you. Ian's words stunned Andy and the saints around him. Grindelwald was also surprised. Ian, Andy's soul is about to shatter. Can it be saved like this? The surrounding saints also said excitedly. Please, sir, save Mr. Black. Yes, sir. Mr. Black, he never betrayed you. Please sir. Don't blame Mr. Black. Dumbledore also frowned, and said. Ian, don't push yourself too hard. Ian heard the words of the two old men and the surrounding saints, and said with a smile. I don't blame Andy, don't you understand me after all this time? You are my friends, and I am your backing. I'm a necromancer, no one knows black magic and souls better than me. The black magic of these people from the Ministry of Magic can't be stronger than the God of Death, right? Hearing Ian's words, the surrounding saints became even more excited. Thank you, sir. I will follow Mr. to the death. Ian rubbed his sore temples and said. Just be quiet, I'll save Andy first. For an instant the saints shut up and just looked at Ian feverishly. Ian patted Dumbledore and Grindelwald on the shoulders, and said. Old man, don't worry, I can bring him back even if he dies. Don't forget that the God of Death was cut with a scythe by me. Grindelwald and Dumbledore smiled and said. Then leave it to you, Anne. Ian nodded, he still knew the condition of Andy's soul through the magic induction just now. Sir, can I really survive? Andy looked at Ian expectantly. Andy only saw Ian cast a sleeping spell on him. Ian nodded with a smile, took out a few souls, and said. You should take a rest first, sleep and wake up. This was the last thing Andy saw before he fell asleep. Ian shattered the soul in his hand with magic power and transformed it into pure soul power and life force. Ian gently put his hands on Andy's body, mending his broken soul bit by bit. Meanwhile, without looking back, Ian just said. Jess, tell Moth to bring someone. Today the Ministry of Magic in Norway was destroyed by me, but someone still needs to manage it. When Moth arrives, you will go to the homes of the officials of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic and visit them one by one. All those who do not submit will be killed. All the families involved in today's war will be imprisoned. Sai chooses the person who can use it, and can use the Imperious Curse or the Unbreakable Vow, and everything else will be wiped out. None of them are innocent. After Dumbledore listened, he wanted to persuade Ian. I thought about it, but it is true, Ian must have a stable environment. This old man is about to move. Then Ian said to Grindelwald. If there are people related to the Durmstrang School of Magic, old man, I need you to arrange the manpower. 11. Grindelwald laughed and said. Of course, that old guy, Michael Caro, has long wanted to come out and do some activities. At this point Dumbledore said helplessly. Ian, I may have to go first, this incident will set off an earthquake in the wizarding world by the time of day. 1. I need to deal with the 597 side of the International Federation of Wizards, and remember to arrange for someone to take over the position of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. Give me some saints, and I will characterize this incident as an attack by an unknown group of black wizards. In the end, it was your hands that repelled the dark wizard. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Ian nodded and said. You can discuss this with Grindelwald, I need to treat Andy first now. You know, I hate trouble. Dumbledore nodded with a smile, and moved aside to discuss with Grindelwald. Not long after, Andy woke up slowly, and the first thing he looked at was Ian. Gentlemen. Ian looked at Andy with a smile and said. Feel how your body and soul are doing right now. Andy listened to Ian and began to check his body with a spell. I saw Andy sat up excitedly and said. Sir. I feel better now. Seeing Andy who had recovered, the saints immediately cheered. Mr. is not only powerful in magic. He is also the top healing wizard. This injury can't be rescued even if it is carried to St. Mungo's Magical Injury Hospital. Seeing that Andy has recovered, Ian suddenly remembered what happened just now. Ian handed the soul lamp to Andy, then patted Andy on the shoulder, and asked with a smile. I gave you the lamp of the soul, you have the final say on how to take revenge. By the way, Andy, how about you come to be Norway's Minister of Magic? Chapter 59. Today's daily prophet and the Muggle papers are buzzing. All the plants in Bialoisa forest in Norway withered in one night. The creatures in the forest are basically all dead. There are also many Muggle footprints found on the ground, but no one knows what kind of footprints. Some say it belongs to humans, while others say it belongs to legendary creatures. Norse mythology was also pulled out as evidence, and some people even sent a scientific expedition team over. But they are destined not to get any answers, and this event has been recorded in the world's top 10 unsolved mysteries. And the Daily Prophet in the Magical World published Rita's article. Norwegian Ministry of Magic was wiped out by black magic creatures overnight. The reporter risked his life to take pictures of the horrific scene while traveling in Norway. Some sources speculate that this incident may be related to the Grindelwald family. We all know that the Grindelwald family was in the early years. In the end, the dark creatures suddenly disappeared again. This is simply a long-planned conspiracy. The undead captured in the photo are like a sea of undead wandering in Bialoisa forest. The wizards who saw the report were instantly shrouded in fear. And the descendants of Grindelwald were once again pushed to the forefront. Especially British wizards. They have seen Ian's bone dragon. In the Great Hall of Hogwarts, today was another day of owls flooding, and countless letters were dropped. The parents of the little wizard are very worried about the situation of the students at school. If you have any questions, please reply immediately and the parents will take them home. Professor McGonagall is also busy with this problem at this time. And when the students saw the photo in the Daily Prophet, they were still in disbelief. The sea of undead in the photo, the undead in it really resembles Professor Grindelwald's undead. So Professor Grindelwald is so powerful. Draco felt more and more his admiration for Professor Grindelwald. He must study the lessons taught by Grindelwald. And Hermione, who has been up all night, just saw the newspaper, she can be sure that Ian did it. Yesterday she knew that Ian and the others were going to fight the Norwegian Ministry of Magic, but she didn't expect that the Ministry of Magic would be destroyed in one night. Ian's strength shocked her again. But Hermione's eyes were full of worry, wondering if Ian was injured. Just when the magic world started to panic, news came from the International Federation of Wizards. The dark wizards at the Norwegian Ministry of Magic last night were wiped out by Dumbledore and the French Roger family. The news cheered up the wizarding world. Dumbledore is also the patron saint of the wizarding world. But regrettably, all the Aurors of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic and the head of the Yulzen branch, Minister Meyer, died in battle. Andy Black has been chosen by Dumbledore and Jack Rosier as the new Norwegian Minister for Magic. At the same time, Andy Blake announced when he took the stage, the bone dragon and some dark creatures in yesterday's photo are the magic of Grindelwald's family. At that time, it was Ian Grindelwald's timely support that successfully killed the dark wizard who controlled the dark creatures. Since the dark wizards were killed, the dark magic creatures were all gone. This news was confirmed by the testimony of Dumbledore and Jack Rosier. With the confirmation of the news, the magic world is boiling again. Many consider Ian to be Dumbledore's successor. There are also some people who think this is a plot by the Grindelwald family. But the speech was suppressed by the International Federation of Wizards. Because the International Federation of Wizards and the Wisengamot decided to award Ian Grindelwald and others the Order of Merlin, First Class. Thank them for saving the Norwegian wizarding world. When word reached the British wizarding world, Ian's claim that he was the terrifying Dark Lord was overturned. The little wizards of Hogwarts cheered. Their professor is a hero. A hero in the dark. Only Hermione was relieved to hear that Ian was still safe, and murmured in a voice that only she could hear. Ian is a big liar. At this time, Ian and Grindelwald are at Zarage Castle in the Scottish Highlands. The two were sitting and having lunch in the auditorium of the castle. There was an extra lunch on the table, obviously they were waiting for someone. Grindelwald looked at Ian with a smile and said, "It's really not easy to fool those old guys this time." Ian rubbed his temples and said, It's really a big mess this time. Grindelwald laughed loudly. It's okay, I'll take care of it. It's time for him to run errands for you. Just as Grindelwald finished speaking, a ball of fire appeared in the auditorium. Dumbledore's figure stepped out of the firelight, Fawkes still on his shoulders. Gale, although I, an old man, have regained my youth. But for me, such errands are still very painful. Grindelwald looked at Dumbledore who had just arrived, and said. Why do you come so timely every time? Dumbledore smiled and said. Maybe it's my luck. After speaking, Dumbledore looked at Ian, and continued. Ian, this time it's taken care of. With the testimony of me and Gale pretending to be Jack, there will be no problem with the International Federation of Wizards. Ian nodded and said with a smile. Thanks, Dumbledore. But next time there is such a thing, I will do it again. Dumbledore shook his head helplessly, and said. I can't stop you, Ian. It's understandable to be angry because of a friend. After speaking, Dumbledore came to the table seat and sat down. Fawkes also flew to the bird stand that Grindelwald had prepared for him, and began to enjoy his own lunch. Dumbledore looked up at Ian, and said to Ian. By the way, Ian, the International Federation of Wizards and the Wizengamot are going to award you the Order of Merlin, first class. Ian smiled and joked. So I've ruined their Ministry of Magic, and they have to thank the Lord for me. Dumbledore said helplessly. No way, the credit for killing the Dark Wizard can only be given to you. Your bone dragon is too conspicuous, you can't even cover it up. Ian nodded reluctantly and asked. Isn't it troublesome to change this ceremony? Dumbledore looked at Ian's troublesome look. Dumbledore suddenly felt much better, and said. It's not troublesome. It has been decided to hold it at the British Ministry of Magic. I will give you the award. Seeing that he couldn't shirk it, Ian could only nod his head and agree to come down. But asked for an extension, he still has a lot of research to do. Seeing Ian like this, Grindelwald smiled and said. Ian, that is an honor that many people will never get in their lifetime. Ian glanced at Grindelwald and said. I just want to destroy a Ministry of Magic a day, believe it or not, you two old men will run away. Chapter 60. When Rita Skeeter woke up, she found that she had been tied up in a dark basement. Her mouth has been sealed with a spell, and her body is also bound by chains so that she cannot move. A group of dark wizards broke into her house suddenly. She was so scared that she immediately used the animagus spell to hide. Her animagus is a beetle, and no one knows her secret. But just saw a wizard stick out his wand and use a magic she had never seen before. She was about to watch the joke, only to hear there she is. Then the beetle she turned into was surrounded by this group of dark wizards. A spell was cast directly on the beetle she turned into. Jess Anchor looked at the woman in front of him, then at the photo in his hand, and said. Very good. I didn't catch the wrong person. Then a saint walked up to Jace and said. When we found the woman, she was a beetle. I found it with the magic of soul detection taught by my master. Should be an illegal animagus. I haven't seen any information about her in the Ministry of Magic. Jess nodded after hearing that, and then looked at the pale Rita with interest. Said. It's you who explained what 197 saw in Norway yesterday. Or should I put a curse on you with my wand and ask you to tell me again? On the other hand, Michael Caro has broken into the Durmstrang School of Witchcraft and Wizardry with the Saints. Igor Karkaroff, who was restrained on the chair, looked at Michael Caro angrily, but the look in his eyes already revealed his fear. Michael Caro is the head of the Caro family in Germany. It is said that he was once a saint. Igor Karkaroff insisted and asked. Me Arthur Caro. What are you doing breaking into my school? Michael Caro first glanced at Victor Krum who was tied up in a corner. Victor Krum's eyes were full of fear at this time. He happened to come to the principal's office today to learn from Karkaroff, and a group of wizards broke into the principal's office just like this and tied him up. Karkaroff was also pointed at with a wand and dared not move on the principal's seat. My Arthur waved his hand and said. Throw him out, the following things are not for him to hear. A saint beside my Arthur nodded, and the national magic wand used the levitation spell to drive Victor Krum out of the principal's room. Karkaroff saw his favorite, CFFH, student being treated like this, and he was completely ignored by my Arthur. He became even more angry, and immediately wanted to draw out his wand. But just as Karkaroff's hand reached for his wand, a death-defying curse was immediately shot at Karkaroff's office. Immediately the desk was blown to pieces. Karkaroff's body stiffened immediately. Maya and these dark wizards really intend to kill themselves. My Arthur retracted his wand, laughed and said to Karkaroff. Death Eater's mouse, can you be obedient now? Hearing what Michael said, Karkaroff turned pale in shock, and hurriedly said. I'm not a Death Eater. Mr. Caro, is there a misunderstanding today? My Arthur smiled and said. Do you know that we all know that a mouse is a mouse? Karkaroff fell silent, but he dared not speak out. My Arthur looked at the mouse in front of him and knew that now was not the time to play tricks on him, and the husband still had something to tell himself. Then Meyer Share said. Today, my husband asked me to ask you for help with something, and you know what will happen if you refuse. Karkaroff was stunned for a moment, as if thinking of something, he asked. Sir? You mean the descendants of Grindelwald? Michael smiled playfully, looked at Karkaroff contemptuously, and said. That's not something you can know. I'll just say it once, otherwise if I kill you, I can find another person's background. Cold sweat had soaked Karkaroff's clothes. He knew that if he didn't agree to my Arthur today, those 4 wizards who pulled out their wands and pointed at him would definitely kill him. Karkaroff gritted his teeth, looked at my Arthur angrily, and said. Then Mr. Caro, tell me what it is. My Arthur ignored Karkaroff's emotions and said. First of all, some students in this study are related to the Black Wizard who attacked Norway that day. Principal Karkaroff, please give me the roster of students from Norway. Karkaroff's anger reached its peak in an instant. Me Arthur. You broke into my school and wanted to take my students away. Just after he finished speaking, Karkaroff saw that the magic wands of the 4 wizards had already lit up green. Karkaroff was so frightened that he quickly lay down on the ground, not daring to say anything later. Seeing this, my Arthur stepped on Karkaroff's head and asked. Principal Karkaroff, do you agree or not? Karkaroff, who was stepped on by my Arthur, was trembling all over. He remembered the time when he was dominated by Voldemort. I promise. My Arthur raised his foot and said. Very good. My Arthur waves to a saint behind him. The saint walked up to Michael Arthur and took the parchment and quill from his bag. Then my Arthur continued to look at Karkaroff and said. Mouse, get up. You go to find the information, then. You say, he remembers. Karkaroff knew that he was powerless to resist, and he was very afraid of death. Karkaroff picked up the student roster on the ground and read. Rag Hammond 7th grade. In Zarage Castle, Jace gave Rita's confession to Grindelwald. Jess saluted and reported to Grindelwald. Lord Grindelwald, the confession and memory of Rita Skeeter of the Daily Prophet have been compiled. After speaking, Jess handed a glass bottle with silver thread to Grindelwald. Then Jess continued. Rita Skeeter did not discover Mr. and Albus Dumbledore. She later sneaked into the Norwegian Ministry of Magic, but found nothing. After reading the confession, Grindelwald said with a smile. Jess, how is our guest doing now? Jess replied. Rita Skeeter wasn't hurt too much. I think she can answer Lord Grindelwald's question soberly. That's good. After finishing speaking, Grindelwald patted Jess on the shoulder and walked towards the dungeon. At this time, Rita's well-groomed hair has become messy, and there are many wounds caused by black magic on her body. Rita saw Grindelwald coming in, her eyes were full of fear, and she hurriedly shouted. I told you all I knew. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. Grindelwald came to sit in front of her and said jokingly. Is that the backbone of the first person in the Daily Prophet? Before Rita could continue speaking, Grindelwald pointed at Jess and said. You can live if you want. Sign an unbreakable oath with him and pledge allegiance to the Grindelwald family. I'm here to be a witness. Jess, she will be your subordinate from now on. The Daily Prophet is yours.